across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. Yes, welcome to the home of common sense. Thank you to Alex Phillips. She's back tomorrow right here on Talk. What have we got this afternoon? What haven't we got this afternoon? We're very busy. Prime Minister Keir Starmer defending the special relationship with the United States, stating that allowing the US to use UK bases and British jets to intercept drones in the Middle East is a true measure of that partnership. I think some might disagree. His comments, of course, follow what Donald Trump had to say yesterday. We'll come to that in a few moments. Elsewhere, Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood has banned foreign students from working from Afghanistan, Cameroon, Sudan and Myanmar from entering the UK. The action follows the abuse of visas by migrants who arrived in the UK and then subsequently, well, they came to study apparently, subsequently claimed asylum. Something fishy going on there, sir. Yeah, you think? And the Labour Party's stealth raid on workers is now expected to drive Britain's tax burden to an unprecedented high, with the increase being faster and greater than previous projections. Is there no beginning to this government's talents? We'll have more on that story as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. Here's how you get in touch, by the way. You can leave a voice note here too, 0344 499 1000, or of course you can call us on that number. Or you can message 87222. Who would best lead Britain through war? The Donald Trump line about Starmer is among the most damning of our times. A simple and effective line on the ineptitude of our own Prime Minister.
And I'm not, by the way, I'm not happy with the UK either. That island that you read about, the lease, okay, he made it for whatever reason, he made a lease of the island. Somebody came and took it away from him. And it's taken 3-4 days for us to work out where we can land there. It would have been much more convenient landing there as opposed to flying many extra hours. So we are very surprised. This is not Winston Churchill that we're dealing with.
Bam! It's not Winston Churchill. In a few effortless words, the US president has exposed and dismantled. We know about the weakness of our PM, and he's done it without a kind of a particular vicious attack. Trump's not always the best speaker. He's mesmerising, and his words can be addictive and enlightening. And he's not alone, of course, in that. But the Churchill point is pitch perfect. He didn't need to say anything else. He merely confirmed what we all thought. Now, this country has had many great leaders. As he alluded to, they sound like this. It is shivers down the spine when you hear that. But our current leader sounds like this.
But on Iran, I want to make clear the UK was not involved in the offensive strikes of the US and Israel. And that remains the case.
Oh, God. Is it finished? Can I look up now? So that's what we're dealing with. Look, I know it's not just about the voice, but our Prime Minister needs to be the full package. And our Prime Minister is not the full package when it comes to political impotence and general ineffectiveness. Which UK... And by the way, we're bound to ask. It's very easy to sit there, isn't it, and say, you know, he's rubbish at this. He's just not very... I mean, Starmer is just not very good at being the Prime Minister, OK? That's now a demonstrable and objective fact. He's not very good at it. Maybe he was a great lawyer. Perhaps he had some effectiveness when he's the leader of the opposition. But all of those roles are a world away from the big gig at number 10. He's just not very good at doing the Prime Minister bit. However, when you're in a war situation, who do you pick? Just think about this for a second. Think across the House of Commons. It doesn't have to be a front bencher. It could be somebody else that you think within those green benches would really and truly take things to a much more credible level. When it comes to war, which leader would see Britain through best? 0344 499 1000. You might obviously pick your favourites. I'd be intrigued to speak to somebody who's going to nominate Zach Polanski for that role. It'd be popcorn time, if nothing else. Who would best lead Britain through war? 0344 499 1000. Think of that name. Think of that person. Might be the party, whoever. Who do you think is the person that could do that with real credibility, with boldness and a measured intellect and all that is required at times such as this? Meanwhile and elsewhere,
I know that the British public expects us to bring order and control back to our immigration system. And as Home Secretary, I will do whatever it takes to secure our borders.
So how is Shabana doing? The UK government have announced they'll stop issuing study visas to people from the following countries: Afghanistan, Cameroon, Myanmar and Sudan. This is from this month, almost immediately. The Home Secretary has said, as well as stopping skilled work visas for Afghans. According to official figures, people from those 4 countries were the most likely to make an asylum claim after originally coming to this country to study. Have a listen to some of these figures. About 95% of Afghans who arrive in the UK on a study visa then applied for asylum. This is since 2021. 95%, which makes you wonder, were they really here to study in the first place? I doubt it. Applications by students from Myanmar increased and others increased 16-fold, and claims by students from Cameroon and Sudan more than quadrupled. I mean, these figures are absolutely huge. I don't know how it's taken 4 years for someone to go, but we think we smell a bit of a rat on this one. All very impressive stuff from the Home Secretary. But as we mentioned a few days ago, can we also ask her what she's doing about Channel migrants crossing, specifically at the moment? I mean, it's a question we've asked every Home Secretary since about 2016. What are you doing about those boats? And so far, nobody has done anything about those boats. But just think about this, and I did make the point at the beginning of the week. Iran is one of 5 countries that make up 70% of Channel crossings. We are currently at war with Iran, an Islamist regime of terror, a death cult that loathes the West, particularly countries like ours. So why would we not have every single intelligence and security officer right now on the beaches of Dover checking every single person and detaining every single person that arrives on a boat? I mean, I would have said that any day of the week regardless, but right now, you've got, in the last year, around possibly 8,000 to 10,000 people, young men, have come over here from Iran alone, OK? From Iran alone. Right now, the place we're at war with, we're still importing people from that country on a boat with no ID, no papers, no passport, nothing at all. Am I making this shizzle up? Would this not be the point when you'd think, hang on, you're the Home Secretary, we're at what? Iran's going on, everything's all kicking off over there. Meanwhile, here comes another 50 blokes from, where is it? Iran. They're straight out of Tehran, these guys. They might be the good guys. I have no idea, and neither do the government, neither does anyone else. Surely, Home Secretary, you made a big play there about the visas from some of these countries, and we all endorse that. But why, in the name of everything that is holy, would you not be right now detaining every single individual? Detaining, not stuck in the Four Seasons or the Holiday Inn, detaining every single individual that crosses the Channel since we began that effort over I say we, as if we're really involved, helping out a little bit the Americans. 0344 499 1000. To help us out with this and the other big stories of the day, Chloe Dobbs is back with us. Always good to see you, Chloe. I mean, where do we start? I mean, let's just have a word, if we could, on
so many stories
Trump and the... He's no Churchill. I mean, it doesn't get any more damning than that.
Actually, I thought that comment from Trump was pretty iconic. I love seeing Trump put Starmer in his place and call him out for who he is. Of course, there's the worrying side of that, which is the breakdown of the special relationship. But I very much had my frustrations when Starmer first came into office and first met Trump the first couple of times. And for example, insisted, oh yeah, we've got free speech in the UK. Oh yeah, we're really in control of the immigration crisis. And Trump just sort of nodded his head and went along with it for the sake of keeping the relationship. And I was thinking, come on, Trump, Tell him that he's an idiot. Tell him he needs to respect free speech more. Tell him that he needs to sort out his borders. And then we've gradually seen a change of tune from Trump on that, telling Starmer that he needs to sort himself out, whether it's regard to Chagos or all those other things in recent times. And I think, on the one hand, I do think that Trump is, when it comes to his military action, I do think that he needs to sometimes pause and think a bit more with regards to making sure that things are lawful, because he's not giving himself the best reputation if he just does things with no regard for international law whatsoever. But on the complete flip side, you've got the completely opposite problem with Starmer, which is that for the whole of Sunday, they sat around in Downing Street, twiddling their thumbs, umming and ahhing as to whether it would be lawful for them to allow the US to use our bases, when it's like, hello, we're in the middle of a war here, this fast-paced situation. Regardless of what decision you come to, you need to come to it quickly and give the US clarity. And hence, I understand Trump's frustration.
Well, I mean, just on that point, I was just, sitting there in Chequers with Lord, or Hermer, whatever his name is, Lord Hermer, isn't he?
Yes.
Sitting there in a big sort of oak winged back chair, proclaiming what is international law. I mean, these people are beyond... Well, they're beyond help in this particular department. They're human rights lawyers. It's in their DNA. It's in their core. Getting Lord Hermer to make a judgment on this, a positive judgment that most people would understand, it's like getting him to, feed a member of his family to a pen of pigs. It's just that he's not going to do it. He's never going to go, that's perfectly legit, this. He's always going to instinctively find the human rights break or international law problem. I'm not suggesting we ignore everything in terms of international law, but there are caveats with international law, and there are exceptions to international law.
And they seem to be able to interpret it in any way they want to fit their worldview. And these two, both Starmer and Hermer, they've got a reputation for defending terrorists. And I mean, they'll say, oh, it's the black cab rank rule, we're just taking who we give him. But if you look at the number of terrorists that the two of them have represented, they've defended so many people that hate this country and want this country destroyed and endangered. There does seem to be quite a strong pattern there. And you do have to wonder, are these the kind of people that we want running the country when we've got the US currently trying to take out a horrific Islamist extremist regime that will happily assassinate women for simply showing their hair in public? And Starmer, rather than focusing on how can we destroy this absolutely horrendous regime and support the US in whatever way we say legally can, he's instead holding a end of Ramadan celebration in Westminster Abbey, telling them what they want to hear, making sure he insists to the crowd there, I just want to be absolutely clear that we haven't had any involvement at all with the strikes on Iran, basically saying, oh, don't worry, I love the IRGC, I'm not possibly going to put down all you potential IRGC supporters.
This is the problem.
We've had mosques holding vigils for the Ayatollah. There are videos of them crying and weeping about the fact that this Islamist extremist leader has been killed. But Starmer wants to keep their vote, especially after what's just happened in the by-election. He's terrified to look strong against the IRGC. He won't be prescribing the IRGC anytime soon.
Why would he even be attending such an event right now? I mean, just don't go there, mate.
He's running it.
Just don't go there. It's extraordinary. Lord Hermer is on the Christmas card list of the Taliban, I heard.
Really?
They don't send many Christmas cards. I mean, it's just extraordinary. We're in this position, and this is everything that is wrong. But there's no way around this. This is clearly Starmer and others. They've looked at, what the Green Party are doing. We're going to come on to that story in a moment. And it's a nod to that particular gallery. Let's look at that story, though, of who's mourning the death of the Ayatollah. It's Monty Python on acid. Over a dozen UK university societies posted condolences after the Iran supreme leader was reported dead. We now know he is dead. Let's have a listen to the Shadow Education Secretary Laura Trott, who had this to say.
In our universities, gender-critical feminists have been kicked off campus, while today the Ayatollah is being celebrated as a martyr at UCL. This is completely unacceptable. What is she doing to crack down on this two-tier system, or is she going to sit on her hands whilst an enemy of Britain is celebrated?
Look, I'm all for free speech. Free speech comes with a few rules and a few T's and C's, just basic stuff. Don't suggest you can go on a megaphone and invite people to come and kill your neighbour. That is not free speech. If you start libelling folk to their detriment, then that's not either. That's also not free speech. Running a morning session, mourning as in bereaved session, for an extremist Islamist medieval death cult leading warlord is, I would say, that goes outside the remit of what is acceptable on a university campus. So hoover all those people up and just say, thank you very much for your interest in UCL, get out. You're all going. And that march you had planned, that's not happening either. The Prime Minister is not turning up to some Ramadan thing. He's not going to that either. Just get rid of the whole thing, surely.
Yeah, I mean, look, different people will have different views because the free speech argument here is very difficult. But when it comes to prescribed organisations, if we are going to prescribe organisations like Hamas and ISIS, we absolutely should prescribe the IRGC. And we have been way too soft on these people. There are IRGC sleeper cells in the UK and many other Western countries. They seem to have been given a bit of a free pass. I think they are well known now, but I think before now they've been sort of less well known than the other organisations like Hamas and ISIS, even though these are the ones who, I mean, they get called the head of the snake, right? They're the ones who are funding all of these proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, etc., who Jeremy Corbyn may call his friends, but they're certainly not the rest of our friends, because
it's the Islamic Revolutionary Guards we're talking about. I mean, the clue is in the name. These
people, they chant death. They get people to chant death to America every day. These people, they consider us the infidels. They want the West destroyed. And the thing that is so terrifying about the IRGC is that, like these other organisations like Hamas, ISIS, etc., is that they glorify martyrdom. They are very happy to die in the pursuit of destroying the West, destroying the Jews, destroying America, right? After, you may think, oh, this is between Israel and Iran. We don't need to be worrying about the Middle East. No, they think they're going to go for the Jews first. They're going to go for Israel first, and then once they're done with them, they're going to go for the US. And the reason why it's so terrifying, the prospect of them possibly having a nuclear weapon, is because they're not worried about mutually assured destruction. They don't care. If they press the nuclear button to take us all out and they see the response coming the other way, they think, great, I'm going to be closer to Allah in heaven, and I'm going to have my 72 virgins. And they just think their life on earth is just one little short blip before they go and have their, perfect paradise in heaven, and they think that their afterlife will be better if they have been a suicide bomber, for example. Yeah,
it's beyond belief. I mean, that phrase, you couldn't make it up, but that's kind of where we're at. Which leader, by the way, which politician would be best placed to lead Britain through war? We're throwing that question out there. We're also getting responses to the Home Secretary's new initiative on visas. It's about 4.5 years too late, but it's here. Doesn't go far enough, of course. Nobody is guarding the Channel, which I would say that even the English Channel should be in special measures right now, given what's happening in Iran. More from Chloe in a couple of moments' time. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
no doubt that the British government has acted in an incredibly weak, equivocal way. It's easy to start a war, very difficult to ensure that the aftermath doesn't descend into complete chaos.
What's your view of that outburst of Trump?
Well, Trump doesn't mince his words, but I think his criticism is justified. I mean, we should have realised where our national interests stood, and he should have expressed immediate support.
We have pursued a ludicrous energy policy, preceding this government, frankly, and all the knock-on effects to that for our economy are catastrophic.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
John says, Trump is right. Starmer is not Winston Churchill, but stick him in an ill-fitting suit and he would be a great Norman Wisdom. Mr. Grimsdale, does that cultural reference mean anything to you, Chloe?
Say that again.
Would you want me to read it again?
Yeah.
OK, I will. Trump, this is from John. Trump, it means something to me. Trump is right. Starmer is no Winston Churchill, but stick him in an ill-fitting suit and he would make a great Norman Wisdom.
Great Norman Wisdom.
Yeah.
Too old, too young for this.
What, you've heard of Shakespeare, have you?
I have, but I haven't read it since I was like in primary school.
Oh, but youth is no, frankly, defence of not knowing who Norman Wisdom is.
No, I don't.
He was it was kind of slightly even before my time in some respects. He was a comedian who used to do sort of wacky things in very tight suits.
And what relevance is the suit?
Because if you stuck Keir Starmer in an ill-fitting suit, he would look a bit like Norman Wisdom, says John.
Okay.
He would be a bit like Norman Wisdom.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of what he wears, be it an ill-fitting suit or a nice one from Lord Ali, he still looks like a plonker and sounds like one.
Well, that's a fair point as well. Yeah. I quite like the idea we just refer to Keir Starmer as Norman from now on. I think that sort of half works in a curious way. Let's move to our next story. This is the government banning those visas from 4 countries. The Home Secretary saying migrants seeking to exploit our generosity. She has selected, and I'm sure along with a big team, Afghanistan, Cameroon, Sudan and Myanmar. These are countries that have got a track record, and in one case, 95% of Afghans who arrived in the UK on a study visa ended up applying for asylum at the end of it. So it makes you wonder, did they only come over and pretend to be studying?
Yes, probably. I mean, it's a known loophole, but the government hasn't really bothered to do anything about it. And whilst this is welcome news, it really is. It's too little, too late, isn't it? We've also got her talking about potentially giving even more money than the $3,000 that is already on offer to people who are here illegally to try and get them to leave and go home. Potentially up to $30,000 she's considering giving. Think about how much that's going to annoy taxpayers. And she's saying, oh, well, it's cheaper than housing them in a hotel for a year. But and the thing is, I mean, you made this point earlier that at the moment we really need to be focused on the channel, because not only is it costing us a lot of money putting these people up in hotels and it's causing havoc in communities, but right now, I mean, the terror threat is probably the highest it's ever been.
Am I the only person talking about this specific angle to this?
We've had our intelligence services foil, I think, 20 plots from Iranians, some of them from people who we believe came here illegally. It should be a very critical. We should be treating it like an emergency situation in the channel, but instead they're going for other things. Which, as I say, it's a welcome policy, doing things like deporting people who have overstayed on their visas, or stopping people from using this student visa loophole. But the problem in the channel, which is very much at people's forefront, especially given we have a lot of, for example, constant videos from journalists going over to Calais showing very visually what is happening. Unless they deal with that, voters are not going to start supporting the Labour Party, which is now in one poll 3rd place behind the Greens and Reform, which is pretty embarrassing.
Well, we'll come to that. Just very briefly, Kay says we are in very dangerous times. The illegal boat crossings would be the easiest way for terrorists to get here unchecked. I agree. These people should definitely be detained in Dover. I don't know why. I'm waiting for somebody to tap me on the shoulder and go, no, Ian, you're forgetting this, as if there's something I've missed in this story. We have hundreds of people on a weekly basis, young men, coming over. The Iranian contingent forms part of the 70% of that group. So over the last year, 8,000, maybe 10,000 Iranians have come here. This week in particular, since war broke out on Saturday, you might think they'd say, right, whatever the normal rules are, all bets are off. Anyone on a boat is going to be detained. It's as simple as that.
Well, I mean, whenever there is a terror attack, the security at airports suddenly goes up tenfold.
Correct.
Everything's coming
Great
off
point.
and going in the tray, and you're being patted down and everything, right?
Great point,
and
Chloe
very
Dobbs.
strict, very strict on
Keep
the passports. They're looking at you 10 times
Yes.
before they let you through the gate. What is
20 sometimes.
What is the point in all of that?
If you can just
there's
float across
no
on a
border
rubber
control
boat.
whatsoever. When it comes to the
We're
channel.
not missing something here, are we? We're not missing something.
Exactly.
This is a great example on the airports. They'll up the security. You'll see more cops with machine guns on railway stations, all that kind of stuff that normally happens unless you come over on a rubber boat from Calais. Then it's all fine.
We may as well just get rid of border control at the airports. Don't bother. Don't look at people's passports. Just let people walk in because it makes no difference.
Very briefly, you mentioned it there. Starmer's unpopularity crisis deepens as a national poll shows coalition of chaos is threatening the UK. Reform leading 23%, but Greens second on 20. This is just cobblers. How is this possible? I mean, really, the second most popular party, according to the YouGov poll, is the Green Party.
I know, and the Green Party aren't doing well because they've got some amazing policies. It's just because Starmer has managed to mess up his premiership so badly that he has somehow ended up in third place behind a party that's policies are just, tax the rich and, appease the Muslim community best we can, go and get them all out. Family voting, as the Electoral Commission have done a report on. It's not good at all for Starmer. And now it's going to be interesting to see which way the Labour Party goes. Do they try and look more like the Green Party, which is open borders, or do we try and look more like the Reform Party that is the complete opposite?
It is just extraordinary. Look, parties can grow quickly. Reform is a good example, but the Green, it's extraordinary. If you look at some of the policies we're aware of, it's just off the skull, and they're led by this real kind of bizarre, freaky, oddball character called Zach, who's not really called Zach. I think his real name's Kevin or something. So, yeah, it's a bit bizarre.
Starmer does look a bit like Churchill in comparison to Zach Polanski, going back to that Trump con, because when I saw a clip of Zach Polanski giving his response to the situation in Iran, where he's the complete pacifist and doesn't want any involvement whatsoever, and says Starmer's launched another illegal war. Imagine if he was in charge. Starmer's bad, but imagine Zach Polanski leading the nation right now.
We've got some great guests coming on. A lot of talk about international law. Where does it stand? Can it be breached? Can you usurp international law with certain specific events? The lawyer, and she's at the top of her game, Natasha Horsdorf, will join us a little later on that. She knows a thing or two about international law. And we're going to be speaking to Washington editor of The Times, Katie Balls, in a moment. Loads to say about that special relationship with America. Has it been irredeemably damaged? And Lord Daniel Hannan, always an amazing voice on these things, is with us in a few moments as well. Chloe, thank you very much indeed. Good to see you. Chloe Dobbs with us here on the programme. More from you, 0344 499 1000.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Just gone 1:30. This in from Brian. It says, I reckon Ben Wallace would do a pretty good job at leadership during a war. That's a good call. Ben, a much respected former Conservative Defence Secretary of State, of course. Really calm, on his game, knows his way around the entire story. This in from John. You're so right. This is reference to the Channel at the moment. Get the army on the beach at Dover. Detain and deport all illegals. Philip says the US are with the British people. Starmer and Labour, not so much. This is a big learning curve, isn't it, for Keir Starmer? I honestly think that this bloke came into office thinking he had the world of support behind him. And he had this kind of curious majority. It was big, but it was also a slim majority in terms of percentage. And much of it gained from people who decided, well, I don't want the Tories in, might as well try this lot. I had no idea who thought that, but clearly enough people did for him to win a landslide. But I honestly believe when it comes down to the nitty-gritty and the real intricacies of government and all that goes with it, I don't think he had a single idea of what was coming his way. And his initial instinct is to revert to type. And we saw that at the weekend of no help for America. Really? British bases, we can't use them because Lord Hermer said so? These are the people making decisions of our times. But are we, or have we, irredeemably, absolutely screwed up our relationship? Donald Trump, of course, delivered his harshest criticism of Keir Starmer, attacking him for insufficient support during the Iran war. He said, of course, you know, you are not, we're not dealing with Winston Churchill here. And that of course, was a huge, huge damning moment. Worth having another listen to what he said.
And I'm not, by the way, I'm not happy with the UK either. That island that you read about, the lease, okay, he made it, for whatever reason, he made a lease of the island. Somebody came and took it away from him. And it's taken 3-4 days for us to work out where we can land there. It would have been much more convenient landing there as opposed to flying many extra hours. So we are very surprised. This is not Winston Churchill that we're dealing with.
This is not Winston Churchill we're dealing with. In a moment, Patrick Coburn with us, Middle East correspondent. First, Katie Balls, Washington editor of the Times. Katie, good afternoon to you. Nice to have you with us. I know you've written about this, the special relationship. Look, when these leaders go around the world, everybody has some sort of special relationship. When Macron goes to the Oval Office, they talk about a special relationship, and that really is saying something. But nonetheless, there has, without doubt, objectively been something rather special between our two countries. I suppose most prominently we look at Thatcher and Reagan as being the epitome of that phrase, special relationship, but it continued with Blair and Bush and Clinton and the rest of it. Where are we now? Because this is not the first time Trump has mentioned it. He's disappointed, and, well, Keir Starmer's no Winston Churchill. That's a swipe and a half, right?
It is. I think there's probably, though, quite a few people who don't think Keir Starmer is Winston Churchill, but as you say, the way it was said...
Yeah, really? He's not? What a surprise.
Glad we're sitting down for that one. But I think that the way it was said, obviously the context being anger about the UK's initial refusal to let the US use RFA bases for strikes when they were preemptively planning Iran. Obviously now defensive strikes have been allowed, but it has clearly stung the president and those around him. And I think when you speak to those close to him, they say he is genuinely surprised that this happened. And we've had a situation up to this point where I think in recent months there have been a few signs that the relationship has been more strained. The technology partnership was stalled. You've had criticism of the Chagos Islands deal before this week. You had criticism around the time of Greenland when Trump didn't take kindly to Trump not liking his plan to take it over. So there have been signs, but generally speaking, I think since Donald Trump returned to the White House, there's been a sense both amongst British politicos and members of MAGA that they're almost surprised by how rosy the pair's relationship has been, because on paper they don't have that much in common. It now feels as as though the shine is wearing off, and we're entering a period where perhaps Keir Starmer's relationship with the president is going to be a little bit more like what Theresa May had to deal with when she was Prime Minister, which was a president that at several moments lashed out against her personally.
Yeah, you've just given an image to me, because remember, just outside the Oval Office, that was the time that he held her hand, wasn't it, as they walked out of the back doors of the White House. He grabbed her hand and they walked like almost a sort of very awkward newly married couple. I'm just wondering if he's going to do that to Starmer the next time he's over there. That really would be the photo I want to see.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he'll try and touch Starmer's hand, but he does like a handshake, and he has a slightly different approach, I think, with the male leaders on those handshakes. So often you'll see Macron and Trump, who have a very interesting relationship, because he's often, Macron is more critical, in the past at least, than Keir Starmer has been of the White House. I think Keir Starmer's rhetoric has hardened in recent weeks, and particularly this week. Yet there's almost this macho respect between Emmanuel Macron and Donald Trump. They both think they are the alpha, and they have these quite power handshakes, which is obviously different to what Theresa May had. But I think the question is, are there still the diplomatic channels open between the UK and the US? We're told that they are still speaking. And therefore, if we're comparing this to other relationships, it feels as though there are two countries that the Trump is the most angered at when it comes to strikes on Iran, and that's Spain for not participating, and for the UK for the hesitation, and they're not going for as fulsome as they would want. Yeah. And so far, he is blasting the UK a lot, but I think he cares more, he cares a lot about the UK as a country, and therefore, just because he is annoyed with the Prime Minister doesn't mean I think he's going to necessarily go as far as perhaps he might go with Spain, where it feels as though, he has less of a stake to a degree if you think about how he has spent his second term and the number of visits he has done to the UK trade deal and so forth.
I just wonder, Katie, whether this sort of goes to the core, ultimately, of Keir Starmer's political DNA. I'm throwing Lord Hermer into this equation as well. You can see these two fellas sitting around an open fire at Chequers at the weekend going, what are our legal options on this one, chaps? And instinctively, every sinew of their being would have screamed, no, it breaches some sort of international law, and if it doesn't, we'll find a way that it does. That was almost their go-to response.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, this plays into a narrative around Keir Starmer that he is a lawyer, that he's had most of the political members of his team who really moved the Labour Party ahead of the election further to the centre have left Downing Street. And now, as he left with his old chum Richard Hermer, who we know really prides international law, and this is a US president who in an interview earlier this year says, international law doesn't stop me. So you have metrically opposed world views. Yeah. I think if we're going to try and add probably a little bit of nuance, you will speak to some figures behind the scene who worked on UK international war conflicts for decades, and they say the US-UK approach has always been a bit different. The UK often goes for a different justification, but certainly the view in the US, I think, is that this is a leader who is slightly all over the place in the case of Keir Starmer, and doesn't have and is too led by international law, which goes back to the Chagos deal in the first place, which lots of figures on the right say, even though it did start under the Tories, let's be clear, the negotiations, but they say it is the subject of wokery and so forth, because it's about, would you ignore potentially UN rulings in the future?
And it's rather interesting. I mean, maybe this isn't the central point, but nonetheless, it's slightly of interest that while all of this was going on, and Trump is suggesting that, Starmer has his eye off the ball, he's more interested in diversity than he is protecting his own. At the same time that was happening, when journalists wanted to get a response on this from Keir Starmer, they couldn't, because he was at a Ramadan event taking place in London. Now, ordinarily, that may be fine, and I understand prime ministers go to all sorts of events. I totally get that. However, when you end up in the middle of a debate, which is what he did, taking questions from the floor about Gaza and interventions in Iran, it perhaps isn't the greatest look and rather compounds Donald Trump's point.
Well, I think he's juggling a lot of things right now. If you think about what happened to the Prime Minister on Friday, which was losing a by-election to the Green Party,
Yep.
and a lot of that being associated with Muslim communities, the Muslim vote, and was Labour losing the Muslim vote. Then you see the visits he's doing, which I think are probably part of an attentiveness to that. But of course, the wider backdrop raises some of the points you've made. It's also not all plain sailing in the US, however. Donald Trump is still under pressure about what is the official justification for this war. And I think some on the UK side feel a little bit as though they're becoming collateral as the president does endless media, picking up his phone to lots of journalists to keep the narrative moving.
Katie, great to have you on with us. Have a great and productive day on the Hill there. Katie Bowles, Washington editor, live from DC. She works for The Times, of course, on that relationship with the United Kingdom. Is it irredeemably damaged? Let's get a word from Patrick Coburn, Middle East correspondent. Good afternoon to you, Patrick. Nice to have you with us. Just on a wider issue, firstly, your assessment. Here we are, day 5, I think it is, since America began that attack on Iran, along with Israel, of course. What is your reading of the current situation?
Well, looked at from one angle, Israel and the US have complete military dominance. They control the airspace. They can bomb and destroy what they want. At the same time, what maybe they weren't quite expecting is that this has started a world economic crisis, or at the beginning of it, because of the Strait of Hormuz being closed, because of the whole Gulf area being sort of blockaded. And it's not obvious how that's going to end. It's quite easy for the Iranians to fire missiles across the Gulf. It's only 200 miles across. So I think that Trump is talking about a long war. If we have a long war, we're going to have an economic crisis pretty well inevitably.
Yeah, there is absolutely that sense. In the first sort of 48 hours, though, Patrick, there was a sense that, it's in Trump's kind of instinct to want to get in and get out quite quickly. That's the sort of language he's talked about in terms of getting things sorted, getting things done. I'll have that sorted in a week. I know that came to nothing with Ukraine. However, you genuinely think this has probably surprised the coalition of Israel and America in the fact that it hasn't finished already?
I think they thought it was going to go on a long time. First of all, it's pretty difficult to work out what they think. Did they expect the regime to collapse? Do they still expect that? Everybody goes on about what is the end game. Well, I guess the end game is to win the war decisively. But I think that maybe people hadn't thought through what happens if not just the Strait of Hormuz being shut, but the Iranians firing missiles at oil refineries, one of the biggest oil refineries in the world in Saudi Arabia, a big liquefied natural gas plant in Qatar. And these things are very vulnerable. If there's a slightest threat, you have to drain them of oil or gas. Otherwise, you've got a sort of great big bomb on your hand that might be detonated by a single cheap drone. Also, of course, it's very easy to close an airport just by the threat of firing a drone at it. So this, in a way, however far the Iranian sort of military is degraded, it's kind of easy peasy for them to close down all the Gulf countries.
And do you sense that might have taken them a little bit by surprise? Because as you rightly say...
Yeah, I think it did. I mean, they've been sort of playing it down, and they were playing up how long they could continue the war. And the Iranians don't really have many pressure points.
Yeah.
These missiles they're firing at US bases, most are shot down, or at Israel, most are shot down. People at the receiving end are mostly safe in shelters. Yeah. But this one is kind of easy for them to do. So I think it has surprised the US, maybe surprised Israel a bit less, but has also surprised the world. And you can see that way that all the markets across the world are reacting in panic at the moment.
And maybe more panic to come. Patrick, thank you for your time, so really appreciate that. Patrick Coburn, very experienced, been round the block for years, Middle East correspondent. He's right on that point. There's, billions of quid worth of military hardware being dispensed from the air by Israel and America. And the Iranians are throwing up an Argos drone and going for those pinch points, the airports, the oil refineries, places that are probably not going to take lives, thank goodness, but will cause irredeemable and lasting damage economically to the wider world. We're going to get a voice in a moment from Daniel Hannan, a great speaker on these things. Always good to chat with Daniel. He'll be with us next on Talk.
No doubt that the British government has acted in an incredibly weak, equivocal way. It's easy to start a war, very difficult to ensure that the aftermath doesn't descend into complete chaos.
What's your view of that outburst of Trump?
Well, Trump doesn't mince his words, but I think his criticism is justified. I mean, we should have realised where our national interest stood, and he should have expressed immediate support.
We have pursued a ludicrous energy policy, preceding this government, frankly, and all the knock-on effects to that for our economy are catastrophic.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. 0344 499 1000. Let's get a word with Lord Daniel Hannan, Conservative peer, former advisor to the UK Board of Trade. Daniel, always good to see you, sir. Interesting times we live in. It's never dull out there, of course. It is a little chilling and worrying. And we speak, of course, less than 24 hours after Donald Trump, I think, probably delivered the greatest insult you can throw at a fellow Western leader. And that is, well, you're all right, but you're no Churchill.
Well, there needs no ghost, my lord, come from the grave to tell us this. The president has caught up with where 85% of the British public is. We knew that. I mean, I don't think he's an Eisenhower himself, by the way, but it is extraordinary at this moment, with everything going on, that Starmer is still determinedly trying to push ahead with this demented plan to pay to give away the Chagos Islands at the very moment, I'm not sure whether you caught this today, and when Mauritius has declared against the US bombing. So it's not even bothering to hide the fact that it regards the attack on Iran as illegal, and this would now be the country that would be sovereign over the base area.
Yes.
If Starmer were able to push ahead with this deal. So it truly is an extraordinary thing. And to be fair to my Labour colleagues, I'm not sure that any other Labour leader would be doing this with the determination that he is.
Yeah, and it kind of... And this genuinely fascinates me about the sort of makeup of, what makes a great leader. Many books and films and goodness, documentaries have been written on this. I was watching the Blair thing the other day, and that's, again, you look at Blair and you think, wow, this guy was pretty darn good. I mean, we've got a whole load of things wrong, but just seeing him in action mode and as a political operator, you could see the nuts and bolts. You could see a sort of central philosophy, if you like, and you can't really find that with Keir Starmer, other than, well, he used to be a left-wing lawyer, and that's kind of about it. And one wonders whether that informs much of what he's been doing.
I think it's the obvious explanation. I mean, Blair was competent. You were never on the edge of your seat thinking, what idiocy is he going to say next, right? Whether you agreed with him or not, he knew what he was doing and he was advancing an agenda. Starmer is flailing around with only this one belief, this almost religious elevation of international law, just at the moment when the rest of the world is giving up on it. He told his biographer, Tom Baldwin, there is no version of my life that doesn't revolve around being a human rights lawyer. And I think this has been the only consistent thing. He was a Trotskyist student, then he was the Corbyn yes man, then he was supposedly the sort of dullard centrist dad who was so reassuring at the election. But the one thing he's been absolutely clear on in all of those incarnations is the subordination of national democracy to international law. And he takes a more extreme view of this than everyone else, so hence this thing that we have to obey a non-binding opinion by a court to kind of give an example, however damaging to our interests. The only other way of explaining his behavior, and I hope it's not this, is that in the aftermath of the Gorton and Denton by-election, the reason he keeps going out of his way to say we're not part of these attacks on Iran, as well as the international law point, is that he is worried about offending voters who are anti-Israel. And I phrase it like that quite deliberately. I don't think anyone is pro this regime in Iran, but there are people who are so blinded by their dislike of Trump and Israel that the fact that it's them doing the bombing makes it unacceptable. And it is quite shocking to think that a British Prime Minister could be appeasing that sentiment against a regime, by the way, which has repeatedly picked fights with us, kidnapped our personnel, etc.
It's rather interesting that while Donald Trump was wheeling out some nifty one-liners over there in the Oval Office, Mr. Starmer was actually at a Ramadan event. And fine, prime ministers have to do all sorts of events. It's in their diary and it's probably in there, a year before it happens. I get that. But it was rather interesting that I understand that event did break out into a bit of a debate about this. And once again, Mr. Starmer at this event reiterating we haven't done anything, it's just defensive, and bringing Gaza into the conversation as well, which sort of rather compounds much of what Donald Trump was criticising him for.
Absolutely right. I mean, of course, there's nothing wrong with attending a Ramadan event. There are plenty of patriotic British Muslims who are horrified by the crimes of the regime in Tehran, and if people are spiritual enough to be keeping the fast, good for them. But to use that occasion to say, oh, and just to reiterate, we didn't attack Iran, creates the impression that you were doing something that you didn't believe in order to pander to a particular sector of the electorate. And that, I think, is hugely unfortunate, right? If we think of what the Iranian Revolution has done, what it's been like, it has spread chaos and violence all over the world. The mullahs have been behind terrorist attacks on every continent, in Central Asia, in the Balkans, in Britain, in the US, even in Argentina. 300 people were murdered in an attack on a Jewish community center in Buenos Aires. Like, you can't be further from Tehran than in Buenos Aires, right? Why were they doing that? Just to show that they could. This is a regime that has repeatedly attacked us, violated the sanctity of our legation building in Tehran, kidnapped British diplomats, seized a British oil tanker, pronounced a fatwa against a British citizen, has repeatedly attacked our allies and our interests. And the idea that we're going to take all that on the chin because there are some voters in some Labour marginal seats who are that blinded by their dislike of Israel that they won't support any action against Tehran. I think that if that really is his motive, that is a shameful thing.
Well, it's the Occam's razor kind of thing, isn't it? I mean, it does appear to be the simplest answer to all of that. And just to, I suppose, corroborate what you were saying, Daniel, about the kind of all roads lead back to the human rights thing. His sounding board for all of these things is obviously one Lord Hermer, who is cut from precisely the same cloth as Mr. Starmer, only perhaps more extremely so.
Yes, I mean, you see this most obviously with the Chagos deal. There is a Doughty Street Matrix Chambers nexus. Richard Hermer, Philippe Sands, obviously the Prime Minister himself. We are governed by human rights lawyers. And one of the odd things about that is that you see how inhumane human rights law can be when it's followed to the letter. So we're in this bizarre situation now where the Labour government is trying to evict the British Chagossians who have returned to their ancestral home. Right? I mean, they never try and evict the people who come across the channel in small boats, or at least they don't try very hard, right? They get given, accommodation and food and vouchers. British subjects returning to British territory are being threatened with immediate removal. And what you see there is that human rights law is actually a very strange word for this thing. This elevation of these abstract principles over any democratic national sentiments we have leads to some really perverse outcomes. So I don't think Keir Starmer will be Prime Minister for much longer, and I don't think any other Labour leader is going to be obsessive in the way that he is. But can we say that having had our fingers burned like this, we're not going to go back to being ruled by another human rights lawyer?
Yeah, I think that would be, in fact, there should be a law, an international law, about not being governed by human rights lawyers. I wonder how they deal with that. We are asking the question this afternoon. It might be a bit unfair to land this one on you, Daniel, but I'll ask you anyway. Who would be best to lead Britain through war? When you look at those green benches and the various faces there, to be fair, past or present, who do you think, putting Churchill aside, is cut out to take us through times such as this?
Well, past, it would be Margaret Thatcher. I mean, I think there'd be no question. She had a very strong belief in the rights of British subjects in far-flung overseas territories. I mean, in terms of who should be leading Britain now, I think that whoever takes over from Keir Starmer, actually from their own point of view as well, but certainly from the country's, should go for their own mandate. I think it'll probably be their best chance. They'll probably have a little honeymoon, but setting that aside, the government is now so far removed from the things it was elected to do. Yeah. You know, Keir Starmer came in promising to contain spending and to pursue growth and so on, and he's been completely taken over by the left on his back benches, writing cheques left, right and centre, fire-hosing cash around. There's no mandate. There's no electoral mandate for that. And so any incoming Labour leader, whether they want to carry on spending or they want to try and retrench, they're going to need the direct permission of the voters. So I hope we have a general election, and I'm in the camp of, I think that the Tories and the Reform Party should have a grown-up agreement not to stand candidates in the seats that one of the parties can't win but that the other one can.
And I sense it may well come to that too. Daniel, thank you as ever for your time. Always lovely to speak to Lord Daniel Hannan, Conservative peer, former advisor to UK Board of Trade, knows his way around all conversations, particularly in this field. Let's get a word from Jim in the Wirral. Jim, we've not got long, but what are you thinking? Good afternoon to you.
I'm thinking Ian Duncan Smith would make a great leader at this current time in a potential war situation.
Yeah. It needs...
He's a cool-headed...
Cool-headed, that's the point, isn't it? You need a calmness at this time.
Calmness, but firm. Calmness, but firm. When he says something, you actually believe that he's telling the truth.
Yeah.
And that's what we need. We need someone... I mean, I listened to Keir Starmer, and I just don't believe. I've got nothing against the man. I just don't believe a word that comes out of his mouth. Because I don't think he believes it.
It's weird. I'm sure if you went for a pint with him or went to Arsenal with him, you know, had an afternoon out, maybe he's a nice bloke, Jim. You know, he might be a fine fella. I'm sure he's a great dad and all that stuff. But he's a terrible prime minister.
But that doesn't give you the authority to run it.
No, it doesn't.
In the country.
It really doesn't.
I wouldn't let him run a bath.
Well, these people have literally no military experience. They have no business experience either, and I think that's also a fairly compelling requirement for that job. Great to have you on, Jim. Thank you, Jim in the Wirral. More from you on the way. 0344 499 1000. Amanda says, I look forward to the day when the British Prime Minister puts the needs of the country before his job. I'm certain that man will be Nigel Farage, says Amanda. Quite a lot of people making that point. Back to you in a couple of moments. Lines are open. It's Talk, and let's get the news at 2.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. Welcome back to the home of common sense. This is Talk. Just keeping our eye as well on HMS Dragon. This is the boat they're sending out there to protect Cyprus. It's not going to depart until next week. I mean, talk about being late for the flipping party. We are getting some breaking news. It's moved 3 millimetres in the last 24 hours. So should be there by the end of next week. But we'll update you, of course, on any stories around that, as we're updating you on the stories of Keir Starmer defending his special relationship with the United States. I think that's one-way street now, stating the US, allowing the US to use UK bases and British jets to intercept drones in the Middle East is a true measure of our partnership, he says. Those comments, of course, come following that personal attack from Trump, whose latest words Sir Keir Starmer dismissed as irrelevant to the core alliance. Yeah, but it was a massive swipe, mate. Not a good look. Elsewhere, Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood has banned foreign students and workers from Afghanistan, Cameroon, Sudan and Myanmar from entering the UK. The action follows the abuse of visas by migrants who arrive in the UK, do a bit of studying and then eventually claim asylum. It's a rigged and corrupt system. It's been abused for years. They've only just worked it out, but she needs to go further. And the Labour Party's stealth raid on workers is now expected to drive Britain's tax burden to an unprecedented high, with the increase being faster and greater than previous projections. Is there no beginning to this government's talents? More on that, and of course the other big stories of the day. 0344 499 1000. Pumpkin says, won't be long before we are queuing up at the petrol pumps for fuel. God help us. It's interesting. I was talking to a fella in the... I didn't realise I'd gone to the cheapest petrol station in my neck of the woods. I actually thought I'd gone possibly to the most expensive, because my local one, a supermarket one, had no petrol, not because of a shortage, but because of some engineering works they were doing on the pumps. So I ended up going to another one. I thought it's on a very busy road, and it's likely to be more expensive. Turned out to be the cheapest, $1.31 a litre. Meanwhile, the Shell garage down the road is currently $1.44 a litre. So about a mile and a bit apart, and there's 12p difference between the 13p difference between those two garages, which, you know, if you're filling your tank right up, could be a tenner's worth of difference or thereabouts. So it is huge, and there is, the fellow I was talking to in there said there are people sort of panicking at the moment and buying when they don't need to. He said there is no shortage. He said there's nothing on the radar at the moment, but it is a story people, of course, will naturally keep their eyes on, as will we. Now, as I mentioned, Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, has banned foreign students and workers from those 4 countries. Just to read them again: Afghanistan, Cameroon, Sudan and Myanmar from entering the UK. The action follows the abuse of visas by migrants who arrive in the UK, do a bit of studying and then eventually claim asylum. And in one case, in the Afghan case, 95% of those that were coming in ended up claiming asylum. This is a huge number. She's put a stop to it. Will it work? Does it go far enough? Let's speak with Tom Jones, Deputy Online Editor of The Critic. Tom, good afternoon to you. It's been 5 years in the making, but here's a policy that I think many people would support the government on. Who couldn't when it comes to this? Does it go far enough?
I think it's a start, Ian. As you say, we've been waiting. I think you're slightly underplaying it by saying we've only been waiting 5 years. I think we've been waiting a lot longer.
Well, quite possibly.
A tightening up of our immigration system. Last year really came to a head. The number of migrants claiming asylum actually outstripped the number of work visas issued. Migrants swapping from work, study or visitor visas to claim asylum made up nearly 4 in 10 of the 100,000 or so asylum claims last year. That's triple the number from 5 years ago. So in the last 5 years, I think it's 135,000. So this is very clearly a system that is becoming widely open to abuse. And it's a start. I think really this is more of a political test for Shabana Mahmood to see if she can get it through the party. With the loss of Gorton and Denton, a lot of the left of the party have blamed her and her immigration crackdown for that loss. So it'll be interesting to see. I think this is a real litmus test for Labour to see if they can get this through and go further.
There will, of course, be people on the Labour backbenches who say, well, hang on a second, Home Secretary. You know, there's students and whatever in Cameroon and Sudan who have every great intention of coming to study at one of our amazing universities. They want to come and then they want to decide how they want to return back to their home country after that. So to tar everybody with the same brush is an outrage. You can hear the backbenchers saying this.
Yes, you can. I think this demonstrates two problems, basically. The first is that we have a university sector that, because of various basically political decisions around not raising tuition fees, has become basically mortgaged to foreign students. And it's become a real cash cow for them. A lot of provincial universities are only kept going now because they have a London campus, and also there is abuse in this system as well. There is quite a common trope now. If you walk around Westminster, you will see a lot of demonstrations for increasingly small-scale, basically conflicts abroad. And what's happening there is a lot of the time people essentially make up their own protest and submit that as evidence to the Home Office that they require political asylum, and often it's conflicts that, frankly, we've never heard of and have no idea about. And again, that is a lot of gaming of the system.
And we will see how this reacts. Again, those backbenchers will not be happy. Tom, thank you for your time. Tom Jones, Deputy Editor, Online Editor at The Critic. Let's get a word from Rivka Shaw, Policy Officer at the Greater Manchester Immigration Aid Unit. Rivka, good afternoon to you. I alluded to it in that conversation with Tom. You know, there's going to be some very disappointed students who are thinking, hang on a second, this is a place of one of the world's greatest seats of further education. I want to go over there, do my bit, and then come back and impart my newfound knowledge in Sudan or Cameroon or wherever it is I've come from. This is a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. What are your thoughts on that? Good afternoon.
Hi, Ian. I guess I would want to just start with a reminder that people who are in the UK claiming asylum want the same thing that any one of us do: to live a safe life, to have security, to not be fearing for their life. And I think it's worth saying that the instability that we've seen in the world over just the past few days is a reminder that, sadly, war and displacement is ever present in the world we live in. And it might have made some people reflect on what it would be like to be thousands of miles away from home and suddenly circumstances change and you're separated from your family, your movements are curtailed. So I think we should be proud to offer sanctuary and support to people who are forced to flee. But instead, the Home Secretary is once again attacking the rights of people who arrive here looking for our help, whether they do so irregularly or on a visa.
But these aren't people who are coming here claiming asylum. They're coming here under the basis they're doing a mathematics or a woodwork degree, and then at the end of it, tell us, oh, actually, I can't go back, you know, it's too dangerous for me. I mean, that's a con, isn't it?
It's absolutely not a con. I mean, so there, as you say, there are people from specific countries, including 2 countries that are currently facing devastating civil wars, who are in the spotlight today. Quite possibly, students from those countries who've already claimed asylum were already here when circumstances in their country changed for the worse and made it impossible for them to return. That's absolutely not a con.
95% of Afghans who arrived in the UK on a study visa then applied for asylum. Now, you haven't got to be Lord Hermer to work out that there's something iffy going on there.
I think, first of all, the reason that 95% number has been used is because actually the actual numbers we're talking about here are fairly low. So 550 people from Afghanistan claimed asylum after being here on a student visa. That's not an overwhelming or worrying number. But I think, importantly, regardless of the individual circumstances of those students, they arrived in this country legally and safely on planes with visas. That's what the government is saying they want people to do. So what they're doing is cutting off yet more safe routes for people to get to the UK.
But they're not coming here for asylum, are they? They're retrospectively going, oh, I don't want to go back home now. And, you know, the smart money says, you know, again, if you look at Cameroon and Sudan, more than quadrupled Sudan, the people applying for asylum, 16-fold increase in those from Myanmar. who came originally apparently for some further education and then miraculously discovered they can't go back home. I mean, this is all shades of iffy, isn't it? There's a cartel of illegality going on here, and it's gone through the roof, and the Home Secretary has spotted it and said, we're not going to take it anymore.
Absolutely not. Listen, we've seen crackdown after so.
What are you basing that with respect?
Narrowing rights.
What are you basing that on, other than your desire to want to believe it?
We have seen crackdown after crackdown over the last year, the last few years, narrowing and attacking the rights of people who are coming to the UK for whatever reason. So to be clear, according to the government, if you arrive here on a plane, on a visa to study in the UK, your circumstances change, and then you then claim asylum, having never got on a small boat and arrived in the UK irregularly, you're abusing the system. But if you arrive here irregularly on a boat with no visa, you're also abusing the system. There's no way for people from most countries suffering violence and displacement to get here. But also, according to the government, if you don't claim asylum at all and you're on an immigration route hoping to settle in the next 5 years, bad news, you're also abusing the system, and that settle route is now going to be 10 years. There's no let-up, and people are completely legitimately asking, what do they want from us?
Well, you say there's no let-up. I mean, there's quite a lot of people do make it into this country legally or illegally, and one can argue about whether it's too many or not enough or whatever. What we do know about these countries, if you go back 3 years, all of those countries one could have claimed are dangerous places to return to. So why would anybody have come over knowing that it's already a dangerous place? It suggests that those people that came over came to do their further education and always had a bottom drawer plan to stay. They're overstayers, they're criminals, right?
Absolutely not. They're neither of those things.
Well, they're certainly overstayers, and that would be criminal.
They're not overstayers, because if they've claimed asylum before their student visa has run out, then they haven't overstayed on a visa. But listen, this is only one headline from a whole host of headline-grabbing anti-refugee policy announcements from the Home Secretary this week. We need to look at the bigger picture, and it's really hard to keep up and determine from it all what she actually wants. What she's doing is keeping migration once again in the headlines, once again whipping up hatred and fear far beyond what's fact.
Why is it hatred? I don't hate any of these people, but I can also I can simultaneously believe that they shouldn't be here. I don't hate them. In fact, if I was living in Sudan, I'd probably want to live here as well. I don't blame somebody for giving it a go. That doesn't mean that it's our duty to facilitate that desire.
You may say that you don't think hatred is being directed at those people, but for the people that are in the asylum system and in fact in the wider immigration system, that is what they're experiencing. I work with people who are in the asylum system, and they tell us that they wake up every day in fear, that they're terrified for their children's safety, that they feel unwelcome and unsafe, but crucially also that they worry that this is preventing refugees from integrating into UK society and contributing as much as they would like to. They say that living in this state of fear and instability isn't conducive to that contribution, that integration, those ideals in the Home Secretary's own terms.
But you're sensing the Home Secretary has kind of got an agenda of hatred almost here. I mean, she's just picked 4 countries where the evidence suggests that people are deliberately playing this game because the numbers suggest that. She's not in any way, I mean, she might be slightly to the right in Labour terms, but nobody would call her a hardened right-winger. She's not Nigel Farage. So in that sense, she's taking a pragmatic and sensible approach to what is a problem economically and a problem in terms of cohesion and a problem in terms of the law. People were breaking it, and therefore she's going to put a stop to it. That's literally her job.
The Home Secretary is asking the wrong questions and she's getting the wrong answers. I'll tell you what a sensible solution would be. First of all, if you're worried about people arriving here on one visa and transitioning to another, you can create safe routes, real generous safe routes that benefit the people that need them. Then you don't have to worry about this kind of fabricated problem, and more importantly, people don't have to risk their lives.
It's not a fabricated problem though, is it? I gave you the numbers there. 95% of Afghans arriving then applied for asylum, and that's not a fabricated problem. That's a problem that the Home Office would look at and say, this is a big issue. There's something going on here. We're going to put a stop to it. It's the government's first duty to protect its borders.
Actually, Ian, I gave you the numbers, and the numbers show that this isn't a widespread problem. This isn't a problem.
Well, you gave me a different number.
Anywhere near the.
So you dispute the Home Office's 16-fold increase, quadrupled increase, 95%. You dispute all of that.
I dispute that this is something we need to worry about, and I dispute the fact that these are tiny percentages of the overall asylum-seeking population and the overall net migration population.
But it's a start, isn't it? It's a start to something more sensible.
It's not, it's a start to nothing. And again, I'll continue what a start to something more sensible would be. Again, if you're worried about there being too many people living in asylum hotels, you could make quicker and better decisions on their claims, and you could house them in homes and communities, which costs far less and is better for everybody. You could scrap the for-profit model of asylum housing, which allows private companies to be profiting millions. You could also improve the provision of immigration legal aid, meaning that people aren't having to be in the asylum appeals backlog, aren't having to make last-minute appeals to avoid removals, because believe me, that is not a situation that anybody would put themselves in voluntarily. You could improve asylum decision-making, because the size of the asylum and appeals backlog is down to notoriously poor decisions by the Home Office, which is a notoriously incompetent department. There are many, many, many things that the Home Secretary could be doing that would be sensible.
Well, some would argue, Rivka, that actually makes things much more attractive. Then, you know, a country should be really bloody difficult to get into, shouldn't it? Even a good civilised, forward-thinking country, it should be so hard to just hop it over a piece of water or whatever method you choose. It should be difficult. It's meant to be difficult. You're talking about making it easier.
There are barely any routes to come to or to stay in the UK which haven't been attacked and made more difficult, made longer over the last year.
Why is that a bad thing?
People who are doing everything right, people
Why is
who are
that a
doing
bad
everything
thing,
according to existing rules, who are coming to this country either to seek safety or to contribute to work in the healthcare system, to work in the social care system, all of those people are getting the message at the moment that they're not wanted. This is one more removal of another safe route to the UK.
Okay.
For people who are singling out people who are facing some of the most devastating civil wars.
I get it. I understand. I get it, and I understand. And you know, nobody that I've ever met, even some of those ardent right wingers, are against helping people who are in genuine need and desperation. Of course, the question becomes, you know, who are those people as distinct from any other group of people? I appreciate you work in this field, and politically and otherwise your affinities and the like are going to be in that direction. But there is another view out there, which is widely held by many people, and that is that it's a good thing to cut off routes into this country. That we have too many people in this country. We have an issue with social cohesion in this country. There's never going to be, no matter what kind of dream world somebody wants to live in, it's never going to really be fully solved, isn't it? I mean, if you have 30,000 people living in a town from a very distant land with no similarities to this one, it is not wrong or offensive to explore the problems that might throw up. In fact, it should be your duty as a country.
As I already said, the answers to problems and questions of social cohesion is to allow people to settle here, to allow people to have security here, and to be able to fully participate in British society, which is what people tell us time and time again that they want to do. And when you talk about there being too many people here, I just think, you know, my question is, what do you mean? Do you mean too many people arriving in the UK regularly? Then the answer surely is not to shut down safe routes, as the government has been doing. Do you mean too many people to arriving to work in our collapsing social care sector? Because that's already down by over 90%. Do you mean too much money being spent on hotels? Again, I'd agree. I'd ask why private companies are profiting millions from the asylum accommodation system. It's very likely that your listeners have a skewed sense of what the problem is here, because it's hard to wade through the headlines, the rhetoric that we hear every single day, and to get to the truth. But as I say, the solutions are simple. These kind of tough posturing policies, this reform style policies that Labour is aping, are often presented as a deterrent. But there's very little evidence that this works. There's very little evidence that people coming to the UK know the ins and outs of immigration policy. Of course they don't. Most people living in the UK don't know the ins and outs of immigration policy.
So if it doesn't work, then as far as you're concerned, that's a good thing.
Much of the policy detail we've actually seen, to the extent that there has been policy detail rather than just policy by press release in the last few days, the policy detail we've seen is about people already here, and it's about making life miserable for them rather than for people who are on their way here. That doesn't mean that those people who are going to leave. It means that it's much harder for them to put down roots, be safe and flourish here in the UK, and that's the problem.
Rivka, thank you for your time. Really appreciate that. Rivka Shaw, Policy Officer at the Greater Manchester Immigration Aid Unit. Your response to what you just heard there, 0344 499 1000. We'll have more from you on the phones in just a couple of moments. This is Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
And HMS Dragon has still not moved. On that point, Debbie says, don't forget, Ian, that the Dragon has to make sure it's manned with the correct DEI percentage. And Debbie goes on to say, manned probably isn't the correct term now. Yeah, how dare you, Debbie? Who uses phrases like that now? Manned. It's non-binaried. The ship's got to be non-binaried before it can go out to war, just to make sure you ticked all those lovely boxes. Let's talk to Ian down in London. What have you got for us, Ian? Afternoon to you.
Hi, Ian.
Hi.
Sorry to be a pain, but
right.
Your guest that was on before was very interesting. The one that said about with Starmer, with Hermer, and all these from the same chambers.
Yeah.
Right? And he was saying, we know what we get with that. But we know what we'd get with anything else that came from the left side. That quite simply, if they think the Starmer's given away the Chagos Islands for nothing, really, or no, sorry, nothing, we got to pay for the privilege.
Yeah.
The next lot that come in from Labour, or worse still, the Green, it'd be even worse what they would give away. It'd be absolutely, they would actually not even sort of say, they'd be like, you know, the old joke, you know, they'd be waving the white flag before even people have started a war, right? Or anything, right? And Starmer...
So you're talking about a replacement for Starmer, like a Rayner character?
Yeah. Rayner, they would, whether it's Rayner or it was, who was the one that was from White Man Van?
Emily Thornberry.
Yeah, Thornberry. Should be even worse.
I don't think she's going to become the Prime Minister, though, having said that.
No. The only one that seems to be of any sort of sense on that side, right, only one I've heard, is the Defence Minister. He's the only one that seems to have sort of said anything that actually makes sense. Right? And with Starmer, we should have known what he was going to be like. What did he do with his son? He hid his son in Ali's flat so he could be hidden away and sort of do his homework on time. He went to football. Oh, it's no good enough sitting with the supporters. I've got to be in a private suite. And it was all a security issue. You never saw that with Sunak. Sunak stayed with the fans. Even Corbyn, to his thing, stays with the fans. Right? And it's all the way through. It's in their nature as to what they call them, champagne socialists.
Well, that would absolutely, you know, clearly define a lot of what is going on. But I wonder if it's a bit more than that, Ian. You know, I wonder these people are drinking from this curious human rights cup, this chalice. And I don't use that as a pejorative. That is, as Daniel Hannan said, you know, that informs everything they do. So they have an innate belief in their own rightness that they don't consider that their ability to be correct is arrived at through kind of intellectual means, debate and conversation. They almost believe it's a morally given gift that they have to think and only function in the name of all that is great and good. It's almost ecclesiastical in that sense. Ian, I've got to move just to get more voices on. Great call, though, from Ian on that. Let's talk to Darren in Surrey on immigration, and I think our previous guest on this, Darren. Afternoon to you.
Yeah, hi, Ian. Hi, thanks. Yeah, I only caught the end of your previous guest, just getting into the car, but I've got a couple of points which are a little bit anecdotal, if I'm honest, and so I'll start off with, I remember my nan's not with us anymore, but I remember when she was getting care from the local authority, I'd go and check on her. There was 3 Somali ladies that would be in the kitchen cooking something up for her and everything else, and they were lovely and they would try to look after her, but they couldn't communicate with her. They couldn't speak a word of English. So that to me seems a bit of an issue. People should at least be able to communicate. Second of all, where my mum lives, there's a few old people down her road. We've got some guys, young 30-year-old African guys that will pull up their car, go and check on the person. I don't know what time they're allotted for each person, but they're in there for 10 minutes, they're back out again. They don't really seem to be bothered about the job. It's a case of that they've been brought over to do this job. So what I'm alluding to here is I believe that there's a lot of... They're using them for cheap labour. They're exploiting them. The local authorities...
Oh, there's definitely a lot of that, yeah.
You know, and then when I travel around for my job, I see so many of these different immigration lawyers and immigration officers. So when she says that people don't understand the system, I suppose you're probably right, but there are people out there that are earning money off this that do understand.
We have a whole industry, right, in this country that is literally, of which she is part of. I know she's from a charitable side, and I'm sure she has great intentions and is a lovely person. But, you know, there is also a reality check, and a reality check doesn't mean that you're some evil, hateful, right-wing nut job because you believe in a very, very strict immigration policy. And that's been the problem. That's why people like Starmer get away with it, because they think you are those things if you so much as question things.
But we can't have a common sense conversation about this. I mean, and lastly, what I would say is, I'll probably vote reform. I voted for reform in the last election. I believe that the illegal immigration really needs to be tackled more than anything else. But I also believe, and I've seen it, and my wife is Slovak, by the way, so I've seen a lot of things that have happened in her hometown near the border with the Ukrainians.
Yeah.
The people who need help here, invariably, I would say 90% of them are still there in these countries. They're not being helped.
That's It's a very good point. Darren, your phone line is slightly getting the better of us, but on that point, thank you. Darren down there in Surrey. We almost have to change the definition of what is, you know, meant to be hateful or extreme. And we've been in this place for so many years now that the minute you suggest, you know, you want to deport X amount of people, then somehow that is an act of hatefulness and evilness and a lack of understanding and not caring and all this kind of stuff. The fact that caring is a spectrum and it can hoover up all different elements as you go through that spectrum is lost on these people. They simply focus on a certain set of words, or you can't say that. So I think it should be unremarkable for someone like me to be able to say, we should not be importing third world people into a first world economy without either some absolutely godlike establishment of utter desperation and human rights needs. Literally, they're about to be tortured to death by some despot. We all get that. Or that person is coming over because they're a neurosurgeon and about to, you know, enhance our medical establishment by their inclusion in it. But broadly speaking, to say that at this stage in planet Earth's evolution, it's maybe not best practice to import third world people into a first world economy just like that without thinking there's going to be ramifications, even if those ramifications are not criminal, no one's raping anybody or robbing anybody, they're just, let's say they're neutral. They're going to be expensive and they're going to be of no use whatsoever in that respect. So why would you do it? That should not be remarkable to make that point. That should be taught to kids to make that point. 0344 499 1000. It's just gone 2:30. This is Talk.
Across the UK, DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, just gone 2:30. Now, overnight, airstrikes were exchanged in the Gulf as the conflict between Iran, the USA and Israel entered its fifth day. Explosions reported around Jerusalem as Israel's military activated its defences against incoming Iranian missiles. The IDF stated it launched airstrikes on Beirut, the Lebanese capital, targeting strongholds of the Iranian-backed terror group Hezbollah. In a moment, we'll speak to the barrister and legal director at UK Lawyers for Israel, Natasha Hausdorff. But first, Elon Levy is a former Israeli government spokesman. Elon, great to have you with us. Just give us a view, if you like, a sense of how it's feeling in Israel right now.
Yeah, glad to be here with you. I was worried we would miss this interview because just moments ago we had another missile siren. I think there have been about half a dozen today and had to run into the bomb shelter. And that could happen during this interview. So apologies if I get up and run.
No, understand totally. You run.
Morale in Israel is high because there is a determination to finish the job. For decades, the Iranian regime has pursued a vision of death to Israel. They've surrounded us with a network of proxy armies that have been attacking us on 7 fronts for the last 2 years since Hamas's deadly October 7th massacre. And now the tables have turned. Together with the United States, Israel controls the skies of Iran. It killed the supreme leader. It took out 40 top Iranian officials in the first minute of the attack. Israel and the US are attacking Iran's nuclear facilities, ballistic missile launchers, downing the Iranian Navy, attacking the instruments of regime oppression, the agencies responsible for slaughtering thousands of protesters in the streets. So people are anxious. They don't like running into bomb shelters every few minutes, but they understand it's a sacrifice we have to make to remove the existential threat of an Iranian regime with nuclear weapons.
How does this, of course, you're not a psychic, I understand that, but clearly this has been very swift and appears to have been quite effective in what Israel and the US set out to achieve. But of course, war is an inconsistent business, and if something like this were to continue for too long, then enthusiasm or support or appetites can begin to change.
War is unpredictable, and the Iranians are learning the hard way, having launched a war 2 years ago, the Iranian Axis attacking Israel on several fronts. That has exploded spectacularly in their faces. But Israelis understand that the Iranian threat is existential. This is not a war of choice. It is a matter of national survival. The Iranian regime swears by a policy of death to Israel, death to America. And it's poured billions of dollars immiserating its own people to achieve that. We cannot allow the Iranian regime to get nuclear weapons, and we cannot allow them to build enough ballistic missiles that they are then untouchable and can build nuclear weapons because no one can stop them. So that's why there is a lot of determination in Israel. We understand it's not a problem we can sweep under the rug or kick into the long grass. It has to be dealt with now, and it has to be dealt with now that the Iranian regime is weaker than it has ever been, before it reaches that point of strategic invulnerability when no one can touch it and it can race towards nuclear bombs.
Wise words. Elon, thank you for your time. Stay safe, sir. We got through it without anything going off in the background. Elon Levy, former Israeli government spokesman. Thank you to him. Let's speak with Natasha Hausdorff, barrister, legal director at UK Lawyers for Israel. Natasha, nice to see you again. Great to speak. Just give us a view, if you would. This business of... I'm almost fed up with this phrase, international law, that it just seems to be this sort of catch-all, go-to camouflage that is used to thwart any other kind of view on anything at any time. And there are people, lawyers around the world in your profession, but a very different area of your profession, that almost have this sewn into their DNA. And I'm thinking of a bloke called Keir Starmer as number 1 on that list, and not Lord Hermer a close number 2. What is the deal then? What specifically is the legality of of international law? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. Always good to be with you. Well, both very much of my profession as fellow members of the bar. Your words worry me greatly, Ian, because it suggests that the general patience with this, quote, international law is running out. And if that is as a result of these consistent misrepresentations of it, then the big loser here is international law, and us by extension, given the lack of credibility of the international legal order. The bottom line is that these strikes by the United States and by Israel are legal in the context of the ongoing armed conflict that exists between Israel and Iran primarily. That has been going on for decades. And so this big debate about the resort to force is being considered in entirely the incorrect legal framework. It's being suggested that unless there was an immediate threat posed by Iran, then these strikes would have been unlawful. And that's not accurate. In fact, the president seemed to be using this as an additional explanation, a buttressing, if you will, of its acting, of the United States acting in solidarity with Israel in its self-defense by talking about an imminent threat, that this was a preemptive strike in response to. That can very well be an additional explanation. An action on that basis would also be lawful, given the kind of threat that the Iranian regime was posing, seeking to obtain nuclear weapons, to carry out and make good on its threats to wipe Israel off of the map, and to continue its targeting of Americans around the world. Let's not forget that since the Iranian Revolution in 1979, hundreds of US personnel had been attacked and killed by this Islamic regime in Iran, either directly or through its proxies. So in that context, let's please talk about real international law and not the, if you will, fake international law, which is damaging the reputation of international law more broadly. And I think you're right, it's providing cover for this extremely dubious political posturing.
Indeed, and I think the mistake that many people make is that when anybody criticises international law in the sense that you have just brilliantly outlined, the takeaway some of these people have from that is that everybody's against international law, and of course that isn't what is being debated here. I was chatting to the archetypal scenario, a fella in a pub at the weekend who was talking about this as if America had just bombed the Isle of Wight, for goodness sake, you know, as if this happened in a vacuum of some kind. I said, well, there was already, I said, this didn't just happen, there was already a war going on there, and I couldn't seem to penetrate this, what I think is a sixth form point, the obvious. This was already a war zone, the threats were already there. The death and the carnage racked up as a direct result of terrorist groups, whether we're talking Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iranian regime, the greatest sponsor of terrorism on the planet. This was already in motion of their doing. Pretty easy stuff, right?
I think you give them a bit too much credit referring to this as sixth form stuff. I mean, I've seen analysis in the New York Times suggesting that a stronger state cannot attack a weaker state. That would be illegal in international law. I mean, that's primary school analysis.
Yes.
And it is truly concerning because the international legal order is important, and it is one that was developed by states to protect peace, stability and international security. That is what is truly under threat through this manipulation, this warping, this misrepresentation of international law. It's not the accurate presentation of the situation. And indeed, if international law truly were to constrain democratic countries from exercising self-defense against the world's foremost state sponsor of terrorism, then I would agree with, you know, the man in the pub and the other detractors and say that this is a system that could very well be done away with. But that's not what we're dealing with.
What we are dealing with, though, is a prime minister that seems fairly wedded to this kind of international law thing in the skewed sense that we discussed, along with his chief advisor on these things, Mr. Hermer, who is equally as wedded to the same rather sort of specious and dubious, vacuous arguments around this. Let me just remind you, 2003, Keir Starmer, this is before he entered politics, of course, a lawyer at the time, just before Britain entered the Iraq War, described participation in armed conflict that violates international law as a precarious business. That doesn't really mean, doesn't stand up to any scrutiny, that statement, but this has been his kind of guiding philosophy. It's almost as if those two words, international law, without any analysis of the specifics or the mechanics and the nuts and bolts behind the scenes. In fact, with this story, it's not even behind the scenes, for goodness sake. It's there for all to see. People have been living it in that region for a long, long time. But this is this is where his philosophy is, isn't it? I mean, this is. I don't think, you know, we will ever get him out of that, because that's where his initial training is. I didn't realise this until I spoke to Daniel Hannan a little earlier. Apparently, in his biography, he made some statement akin to the comment that everything in his life is ultimately governed by international law. So this is in the DNA of our Prime Minister. That's what we're dealing with.
Well, yes, but it comes back to this question of what the real international law is. And if you cast your mind back to a few hours ago in Prime Minister's questions, I mean, the Prime Minister was asked whether if rocket launchers were trained on British targets, this is rocket launchers in Iran, whether if that were the case, strikes on them would be considered by the Prime Minister to be offensive or defensive. And frankly, it was pretty plain that the Prime Minister wasn't able to answer the question.
Yeah.
So this dancing on a head of a pin, which is, and I cannot stress this enough, not required by any reasonable interpretation of international law, and can only, therefore, I believe, emanate from the political calculations that this Prime Minister has taken. No doubt the constituencies that he is pandering to in the UK are not the biggest fans of Israel or indeed a peaceful region in the Middle East, and would not be supportive of action against the foremost state sponsor of terror. And that's what seems to be driving this. But I do think it is inexcusable to use this amoral application of international law and this false application of it to seek to justify that. It's not a get-out-of-jail-free card.
No, and it's always used as if it is, and there's the problem. Just a final point, Natasha, your overarching view on what is happening there at the moment. You know, it ain't over yet, to coin a phrase. Do you think everything's going in the right direction from what you can see?
We've just had an update from the Pentagon, a press conference on developments. Certainly the strides that the US and Israel have been making against Iranian regime targets, against military targets, taking out these missile launchers, ballistic programs, some strikes we understand against nuclear sites also, is pretty extraordinary and exceptional. The rapidity with which air superiority has been established is frankly history-making, and that probably indicates the meticulous planning and careful management that has gone into this. So on that basis, I think both the US and Israel are ahead of schedule, but who knows? War is a dangerous business. It should not be taken lightly. I think the big question is whether these strikes that were taken in defense of Western interests will facilitate the circumstances for the Iranian people to throw off their oppressors. And I think that's something we can all hope and pray for. We certainly do. Natasha, great to have you on with us again. Thank you for your time. Natasha Hausdorff, barrister, legal director at UK Lawyers for Israel. Thank you to her. Back to you, 0344 499 1000. Voice of Doom on the way. Day 2 of a brand new mystery voice. And this comes from Stork in Essex, who says, breaking news, it's just been announced that Uncle Albert will be sailing the HMS Dragon to Greece. We look forward to that. Anyone who knows their nautical way around things, it's Albert, that's for sure. Our lines are open. Coming up on 10 to 3, this is Talk.
Green Party have won the Denton and Gorton by-election. Labour in third place.
Breaking news that Peter Mandelson has now been arrested. So Mandy and Andy have now both had their collars felt.
What would Andrew Loney tell them to do?
To come clean, be honest. And if Charles is complicit in this cover-up, which I believe he is, then I think he has to fall on his sword.
When you define sex, what your gender or sex, what you mean is biological sex, and that's a man or woman, what you are physically, not what you think you are on a Wednesday afternoon.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Rob in London says, afternoon here. Nigel Farage will be someone I trust to lead us into a war situation. He's strong, patriotic, I think I should say, intelligent and great decision-making and knows the law, says Rob. Thank you, Rob, for that. Bear makes this point. Kim Jong Starmer is going to send all our defences abroad, leaving us open to attacks from all the potential terrorists he's allowed in without checks. Don't know about you, but not entirely comfortable with this. Keep fighting the fight, sir. Yeah, we try at this end. And it's always good to know, one of the privileges of working on this station, of course, is that at least you know you're not going stark raving mad. When we have like-minded people who are able to join in a conversation, not everybody will agree with everything, and that's brilliant. It'd be worrying if everybody did. But broadly speaking, that you can be on the same page, and particularly against the backdrop of this just woeful, impotent government at the moment that just doesn't know what the hell it's doing on a daily basis. Have we ever seen anything quite like this? And this is a country that had Theresa May and Liz Truss, Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak running it, for God's sake. So you can see where the bar is on this. Just before we go back to your calls and comments, Voice of Doom Day 2. As I always seem to say, for the uninitiated, it's mystery voice bit, but it's political. You're always looking for a voice of a politician or someone obviously associated with the world of politics. They could be left-wing, right-wing, male, female, dead or alive, young or old. One simple question. Who is this?
There's hardly any experience.
Whose voice is that? 87222. Here it is again.
There's hardly any experience.
If you think you know, that's how you message in. Don't phone, only message. 87222. One more time.
There's hardly any experience.
And if anybody gets it correct, we will tell you who it is after the news at 3. Oh, go on then. One more time.
There's hardly any experience.
87222. Let's talk to Mark in Lincolnshire. Mark, what have you got for us? Afternoon.
Afternoon, Ian. How are you doing?
Very good, thanks. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts, the Iran thing.
Yeah.
I think, in this situation, leader-wise, I think, obviously, Nigel Farage or Rupert Lowe would be far more preferable than Keir Starmer. But that's not really saying a lot. What I think is a difference, though, between those two men in particular, is that Rupert Lowe's been quite measured, quite down to earth and grounded about this situation, in so much as stating, we shouldn't be bombing Iran. And that comes from a place of the state of our existing military, because we're not in a position to be able to do that. We are literally only in a position to do what Starmer is essentially doing, which is defending the assets and whatever that we have there.
Yeah, and he's not been asked to supply any military intervention.
So I think the only thing that both those men, Farage and Lowe, would have done instantly, I would think, is allow access to the bases for the US.
Well, that is kind of the point, though, don't you think, Mark, is that the fact that he dilly-dallied for 24 hours on this really quite crucial point, as Donald Trump said, their planes had to fly halfway around the world because they weren't able to utilise air bases that he thought would be available to him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think... which raises the question, what would be the difference between somebody like Farage and Rupert Lowe? And I think the real difference that I've seen over the last couple of days, just from the tweets on this issue that they put out, is I find Nigel Farage is quite reckless on this. He comes across as quite a bit of a John Wayne gung-ho kind of character with this situation. The impression he gives, he's not saying it in so many words, but the impression he's giving is that he'd be up for boots on the ground, which is not something that we're in a position to do. You know, he'd be up for us striking within, you know, offensively within Iran, which again, it's not something we're in a position to do, Ian. You know,
is Nigel? I mean, I know what you're saying, but I got the impression, Mark, that Nigel was kind of developing some mood music around his level of support for America, rather than the specifics.
Yeah, look, I agree. Yeah, there's an element of that to it. But the words he's using, the amount of poster he was putting out, certainly like yesterday and the day before, would suggest that he's very much, you know, hungry for this, shall we say. He doesn't seem to have much consideration. The other thing that I didn't like from Farage as well was that he was, alongside of his rhetoric about this stuff, was, you know, how broken the military is. And, you know, we're relying on this to sort this out for our military, and blah, blah, it's disgraceful. Britain is broken, blah, blah, blah. And that really angered me, Ian, because we've got service personnel over there that are in an active theatre. That's where they are right now.
Yep.
They don't know whether they're going to come home, Ian. And what do they see if they're looking back home? And maybe some of them are looking towards reform at the next election.
But isn't that, I mean, I say this respectfully to our armed forces, but isn't that kind of part of the deal, that you might be asked to fight?
Yeah, you might be, you know, that is obviously part of what you're going in for. You're going to be aware that that's something there's possibility, isn't it, at the end of the day. But it's not particularly good when you're looking back home and all you're hearing is you're a load of crap, you're useless, you're broken, everything's rubbish about you, blah, blah. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't matter whether Farage is attacking Labour because of that. The point is, if you're over there and you're looking at this kind of stuff about how rubbish Britain is at the moment, it's not exactly inspiring, is it, Ian? You have to admit that kind of wording, that kind of language doesn't particularly inspire you.
Right, so you felt it went too far the other way. I hear what you're saying, Mark. Thank you very much indeed for that great call. A little bit of breaking news. The Scottish Labour MP's husband is among 3 men who've been arrested on suspicion of spying for China. David Taylor is the husband of the East Kilbride and Strathaven MP Joni Reid, was arrested by counter-terrorism officers on Monday. Miss Reid said, "I have never seen anything to make me suspect my husband has broken any law." More on that when it comes through. Phil is in Hull. Back to Keir Starmer and all the furore around him. Phil, hello.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Hi. Yeah, what are you thinking?
I usually agree with a lot of what Mark said, but I totally disagree with what he said. As an ex-soldier, I think the government's priorities is to look after me as well, not send ships to Cyprus or wherever and rely on the Greeks and the French to protect us. And this ship that is sending, is it next week? Next week? It could be over next week. But the thing is, what would happen if any of our people died in Akrotiri? And if you look at his record around the world, first off, we've got Chagos, we've got fishing rights to France, we go to China, the Spa trial collapses, the last one, not this one, the last one, the embassy, you can have your super embassy, we bring up Jimmy Lai. Oh, it was great. He comes home and Jimmy Lai gets 20 years. Everything he touches turns to whatever.
Stuff.
I just think he's an absolute disgrace to this country. And he talk about 20 Iranian plots last year that were foiled by our security services.
Yep.
Well, doesn't that constitute like a threat?
Well, this is again that curious use, Phil, of international law, where Starmer described events in Iran as if it had just come out of nowhere, as if suddenly Trump had woken up and gone, let's go and bomb Iran. That's a good idea. Of course, that didn't happen. Firstly, Trump had given plenty of notice that this was his intention, along with Israel. Absolutely. You know, we're coming to help you. He'd said this constantly for the last month at least. But wider than that, there's been a flipping war going on for years out there.
Yeah,
this is not new. This is not entirely new. International law, in that sense, doesn't have a place in this conversation. It's a curious business, though, Phil. Thank you for your call. Really appreciate that. Phil in Hull. This one in from Andrew, who says, effectively, Starmer is saying the US have started an illegal war. That's the short of it. Good point. That's exactly what he's saying. I can't see the special relationship being very special for the rest of this war, says Andy in Thatcham. That's a great way to phrase it as well. That's literally what is being said. No, it's breaking international law because it must be illegal. Because if it was legal, it wouldn't be breaking international... You see what I mean? Thank you, Andy, for that. 0344 499 1000. More from you on the way in the next hour. And will we get an answer to the voice of doom? Who is this?
There's hardly any experience.
87222 if you want to have a go. Right now, news headlines, 3 o'clock.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side.
Yeah, good afternoon. Welcome to the Empire. Welcome to the home of common sense. Lots of conversations still to come in this hour. American B-2 stealth bombers are expected to land at British military bases in a matter of days to join attacks on Iran. The UK's air bases at Diego Garcia and RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire are both being prepared for the arrival of the US warplanes later this week. We'll have more on that. Also this afternoon, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has defended the special relationship with the USA. He's saying that allowing the US to use UK bases and British jets to intercept drones in the Middle East is a true measure of that partnership. Of course, his comments come following that personal attack from President Trump, whose latest words Sir Keir Starmer dismissed as irrelevant to the core alliance. Well, he would say that, wouldn't he, when you've just been told you are no Churchill. And Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood has banned foreign students and workers from Afghanistan, Cameroon, Sudan, Myanmar from entering the UK. The actions follow the abuse of visas by migrants who arrived in the UK and subsequently claimed asylum. More comment from you on that one as well. 0344 499 1000. In a moment, we'll talk about Britain's economy and all the various ramifications of what is happening with the tax burden in this country, which is off the scale. More comment from you. Jim says, Jim's in the Netherlands. Good afternoon, Ian. I beg to differ from your point that Donald Trump would not hold Starmer's hand. We were making the comparison when Theresa May went to the White House, and as they walked out of the back doors of the White House through the kind of, is it the Rose Garden, I think? For some bizarre, this is when Trump was originally president, 2016. He grabbed Theresa May's hand and they walked hand in hand through the flower beds. It was weird. Anyway, Jim says, I beg to differ that he wouldn't do it with Starmer. In fact, he would hold him with two hands, one on his left shoulder and the other holding his arm, twisted up his back like a bouncer chucking out a rowdy thug from a nightclub. Yeah, he might do that. Or he might just hold his hand like he did with Theresa May, which would be the most extraordinary act of subservience. Well, what would Starmer do? Would he pull his hand away? I think Trump's probably a little stronger than him. John in Germany says, I've come to the conclusion that it would require a figure respected and strong with gravitas and international understanding. A dream team of Dale Winton and Christopher Biggins would fit the bill as a possible backdrop role for Keir Starmer. I quite like that. Sadly, dear old Dale is no longer with us, but Biggins certainly is. I saw him recently. It was at James Wells' funeral, in fact. Yeah, he's still got it. Still got the panache. No one ever would argue with Biggins. And this from John Ross, who says Trump's projecting because he's no Churchill too. I can't be bothered with the public name-calling coming from Washington. Well, it was said earlier on, you know, he's no Eisenhower, and, you know, that's not unreasonable either. I think he was just absolutely staggered by the mere idea that asking for the use of air bases, which had never been a problem as far as I know, somebody will correct me on this, had never been a problem in the past, had suddenly become a problem. 0344 499 1000. Now, the Labour Party's stealth raid on workers is now expected to drive Britain's tax burden to an unprecedented high. Yippee! With the increase being faster and greater than previous projections. That's not a good look, because previous projections were horrific. The Office for Budget Responsibility has warned this policy will be a drag on growth this year, partly due to the forecast that an additional 50,000 people, predominantly British citizens, will emigrate from the country annually. Let's speak with Anna Leach, Chief Economist at the Institute of Directors, the UK's largest membership organisation for business leaders. Good afternoon to you, Anna. Nice to have you with us. I'm quite an optimist, so I was trying to look for... There must be a bit of good news in a story somewhere, and I'm looking through this one, read it 18 times. Couldn't find any. Have I missed it?
Well, what's the good news? I mean, the good news was there weren't any new tax measures announced, so True. That was pretty positive, and we didn't have a lengthy period of speculation in the run-up to the kind of non-event. So those are the main positives to take away from it. We still got an increase in public sector spending, and of course that is contributing to what you've already mentioned, the big rise in the tax burden that the OBR started to sound some warnings over.
In terms of this tax burden, I mean, goodness me, we've talked about little else in this sphere over years, and of course, you know, the Labour Party, understandably, when they were in opposition, criticised the Tories no end for the tax burden, the rising tax burden, up and up it goes, never going in reverse gear. Now it's a whole lot worse. I mean, is there anything, if you wanted to be ultra generous, Anna, is there any part of that tax burden that you could say was inevitable, or is this, you know, is this deliberate policy?
I mean, it's obviously deliberate with a purpose. I mean, the intention is to improve the delivery of public services. And it is judged that more money is what will achieve that improvement in delivery. Now, of course, part of the problem with public service delivery is productivity, particularly in the health sector, has declined markedly since the pandemic. So we're putting more in and we're getting less out. And a lack of reform to address that is what's, you know, costing us all of this additional money, for which to say we're getting less from than we did before.
So are these, I mean, deliberate economic decisions that could have been made differently? Do you sense, again, to be were the government just responding to, the current economic backdrop, so they had little or no choice? Is this about choice? Are there other ways of? I mean, everyone's an armchair economist, everyone's an armchair chancellor. We all know that, and you guys have been doing this for over 120 years, so you know what it's like to look on and see what governments are up to. But we are sort of forced into this big question, is there another way that we should be functioning as a country, fundamental shift, that would change our fortunes and take us to the sunny uplands, as one previous Prime Minister once suggested?
I mean, there are lots of choices which could have been made differently. Of course, the optimal economic model means lots of different things to different people, because there's the Nordic model, there's the US model, they're fundamentally different. People view see the pros and cons of those differently. In terms of this government, of course, their mantra was, it was all about growth. So logically, you would therefore expect all of the choices it was making to be about maximising growth. But that isn't the case to date in what they've been doing. So prioritising funding the public sector out of very significant tax rises on businesses is negative for growth. You take money out of the productive part of the economy, put it into the unproductive part of the economy, arithmetically, you get lower growth.
Of course.
Likewise, similarly, if you increase the cost of employment, what you get is less employment. So there are various things they have done which are definitely anti-growth, which will not improve the economy. Some things have been pro-growth. So putting money into public sector infrastructure budgets, that is expected to drive up growth. And should planning reform actually be done, that is expected to lift growth as well. But the OBR sounds a note of caution there as well. Yeah,
indeed. I mean, no government wants to, every government wants to preside over growth, don't they? I mean, that would be extraordinary if any chancellor of any political stripe or whatever were to say, no, my aim is to take the country into the abyss and wreck the economy. They will all, for different reasons, say, no, I want it to be, we're pro-growth and we want to have a thriving economy. Of course they do. But of course, perhaps blinded by their own economic philosophy is what gets in the way. You mentioned public sector expenditure, etc. Just to go back to the armchair chancellor thing, because I always think, and again, I'm a reasonably intelligent man, Anna, but I am an optimist as well, and I think if I got the job as chancellor, I'd look around the world, I'd have all my advisors standing in front of me and say, well, pick the economy that is doing the best and has kind of consistently, a few bumps, but consistently done the best. You mentioned the Nordic model versus the kind of American model. Pick the one that is nearly always in the top three and do that. That's it, right?
There's an argument for that, for sure. I mean, what people might say in response is, what about the poor and, healthcare for the poor as well? Because, of course, those are the missing ones in America. There's, in essence, the price that is paid for growth in America is inequality. So there's greater inequality. And this is where the trade-offs are really hard for some people. People want growth, but they also want to they want to reduce child poverty, so want to give money to lots of different groups and deliver lots of protections. And unfortunately, in so doing, you want to raise the minimum wage and the living wage, and which is understandable and, you could say admirable, but it diminishes incentives to grow. It diminishes incentives to hire. So there's a trade-off, and actually choosing growth when the trade-off is you don't get to give money to this group that you care about is difficult. Or,
of course, you go the Nordic model and pay a lot more tax, and a pint of beer is about 36 quid. So I guess that's the other side of the coin.
I mean, it is, but again, with the Nordic model, you have to bear in mind their welfare system is very different to ours. In a lot of European welfare systems, you only get to take out if you have paid in. We don't have that here. You can take money out if you haven't paid in. Likewise, NHS free at the point of use, not the case in pretty much anywhere else. Everywhere else has got some form of payment. In Sweden, you pay for appointments, you pay for A&E. There are opt-outs similar to our prescriptions. We don't, certain groups don't pay. But it's not just the case. It's the UK version of the state. but just bigger.
Yeah.
It is a different state.
And as you rightly say, a completely relationship with the systems and institutions of that state. A word, if you would, Anna. 50,000 more Brits are fleeing the country each year under the current government. Now, we're not talking about, you know, kids going backpacking here. We're talking about people who significantly make a change. We will never know the full 50,000 reasons behind it. But is that figure in itself worrying? Should we be concerned about it?
Actually, if you look at the trend in the data, what the revisions which have led to this change do is bring the numbers back into line where they have been for quite a long time. So actually what was weird was what the data was saying beforehand, which was suggesting there'd been a huge reduction in emigration of Brits and actually some coming back at one point. So that story has completely gone now. And you've got net migration is around 200,000 in the most recent years and projected to get to about 230,000 by the end of the OBR's forecast. So in some ways, it's not a completely out of the way revision, but they do sound like very big numbers, but yet they don't do a lot to growth, which is perhaps a little bit surprising. I think they take like 0.1 of the size of the economy in a few years' time, which is really not very much.
Anna, lovely to have you on. Nice to talk. Thank you very much for your time. Anna Leach, Chief Economist at the Institute of Directors. Thank you to her. An overview. Yeah, when you pick a system, it's a bit like the NHS, isn't it? When we go, well, you know, which is the one around the world that's brilliant? Where's the health service? Where is it? Is it in France? Is it in Sweden? Is it New Zealand? What's the one? Like, where's? Pick that one. Just do that. See what they're doing over there. Got brilliant results. They ain't got any heart disease. Cancer is rare. Everything's fantastic. Do that. There's clear reasons. I'm not stupid. There's clear reasons why you don't just do that. And perhaps inevitably they involve a lot more money being pumped in, or individuals having to take out insurances, which is a swear word. Dan's in Liverpool. Back to the issue of leading Britain through war. I can't really ask the question, Dan, who's better than Keir Starmer, because my 7-year-old is probably better than Keir Starmer. But in an ideal world, who'd do the best job? Afternoon to you.
I just want you to ask the next Conservative, Ian, what would Margaret Thatcher have done during this time? I apologise to say, but I think our relationship with America is over, because we all know who Keir Starmer and this Labour government would rather be in bed with, and it's not the US, and it's most certainly is not the British people.
Yeah. Where do you think their kind of affinities lie, Dan, instinctively?
I think the Green Party's vote from where they've won says more volumes than anything.
I mean, you kind of wonder what a Green Party country would look like, right? I mean, based on everything we know about the Green Party, I mean, it's a rather extraordinary idea that anybody would say, yes, let's vote for these people. I understand if you're 18 and therefore you're going through the left-wing phase of your life, then maybe you might think it's a good idea. But I can't really see anything, and I don't imagine anyone else has either, that would go, yep, that's the country to give us positive growth, to take us forward, to make us that shining beacon of everything across the planet Earth. Can you?
Ian, my father and my grandparents from my dad's side escaped Iran, moved to the UK when the Shah went out, and I believe history doesn't repeat itself, but it most certainly rhymes. And this Green Party, what the Iranian regime did to the left back in the 80s, I hope to God we don't see that in the UK when they get in charge. That's all I'm going to say. I wish you and everyone else a good day.
And you too, Dan. Have a fabulous day. Thank you. That's Dan in Liverpool. What a very polite man as well. I wish you and everybody else a good day. A nice thing. What a nice thing to say as well. Listen to Dan. Be like Dan. I wish you a good day. That's nice. This from Kevin, who says a good man to lead us through will be David Davis, ex-SAS as well. Good point. And Sue in West Sussex says there's only one politician I trust to defend and run our country effectively, and that is Nigel Farage. Not Farage, Farage. My error. Let's do the voice of doom. Have we got a winner? This is the voice we played you around about half an hour ago.
There's hardly any experience.
Who is that? These are some of the guesses. Nick Timothy, no. Rishi Sunak is a little bit Rishi, isn't it? Can we hear that again?
There's hardly any experience.
That last word, experience, that last word was very Rishi-like. Sid James, no. Ben Bradshaw, Ed Miliband, no. Wes Streeting, Douglas Murray, Zia Youssef, Peter Brook, Tony Blair, no. Rory Stewart, again, that came up yesterday. There's always a common name whenever we do a new voice. And it does sound a bit like Rory Stewart, but it's not him. Oliver Dowden, no. Robert Jenrick, no. We have not got a right answer, which means it rolls over to tomorrow for day 3. Keep it here. More of your comment on the way next, right here on Talk.
No doubt that the British government has acted in an incredibly weak, equivocal way. It's easy to start a war, very difficult to ensure that the aftermath doesn't descend into complete chaos.
What's your view of that outburst of Trump?
Well, Trump doesn't mince his words, but I think his criticism is justified. I mean, we should have realised where our national interests stood, and he should have expressed immediate support.
We have pursued a ludicrous energy policy, preceding this government, frankly, and all the knock-on effects to that for our economy are catastrophic.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This from Margaret in Birmingham. Nigel Farage, also Graham Stringer. A lot of support for, there's a couple of really tasty Labour MPs. I don't mean like on the eye. I'm talking about, you know, the odd one breaks to. Who was the one? Oh, there was one recently who we have. I thought I've got to look up a bit more about this guy. I discovered he followed me on Twitter. Name escapes me, but again, good kind of common sense voices. Don says, Keir Starmer has the charisma of a dead sheep, says Don. I think that's quite offensive, frankly. 2 dead sheep. Some of whom can be quite charismatic, apparently, when they get to the blowing up stage. Back to your calls. Nick, down in London. What do you think, Nick? Good afternoon to you.
Hello, Ed.
Hi.
Of the recent PMs, I think the only one, a bit of a surprising call, was Tony Blair. I'm not his greatest fan, but at least with the Iraq War, whether you think the Iraq War was reasonable or not, at least with the Iraq War, Blair went in wholeheartedly.
Yep.
There was no half measures about it. And I think if you are going to enter a war, any kind of fight, you've got to go in wholeheartedly. And I think Blair would. So Cameron, no, ran away as soon as things got tough. Theresa May, no, Liz Truss wasn't there long enough to find out. Johnson, God help us, Johnson is a war leader. Rishi Sunak, I think, was unlucky. And Napoleon's maxim, you want from your generals above all that they're lucky. The maxim wasn't, Sunak wasn't lucky.
Yeah.
But this idea, Starmer, the boat's going out next week. I mean, God's sake, it's not exactly Thunderbird, is it? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's leaving port in a week's time. Do a meme of that. The boat leaving 3 weeks on Tuesday with the Thunderbirds.
Well, he did the Thunderbirds countdown when he put on the Christmas lights, didn't he, in his first year in Downing Street?
Oh, God, do you remember that?
It was, yeah. I was thinking, we nearly played that clip earlier. It was going through my mind. It was going through my mind when Trump made the comments about he's no Churchill. All I could think of Starmer going 5, 4, and then, oh look, you wonder if it's going to happen, don't you? It was just so awful.
Just laughable. I mean, it's just cringingly awful. Nearly as bad as the pancake to Rachel Seeds last week.
Oh, that's right. Didn't he give her a pancake? Which, I mean... never do any photo opportunity with a pancake if you're a politician because of the toss-based implications of it. I mean, you leave yourself wide open, don't you?
Tony Blair, I'd say, if we're going to have... Because at least if you are going to fight full on,
Got it. I hear you. Listen, Nick, thank you very much indeed for that. And, Blair's had a lot of airtime in recent weeks. He's done some newspaper interviews. He's the documentary that we've talked about that he did on Channel 4, where he goes into detail about that decision-making. And I know it wasn't easy because, he did have to... he had time to consider and ponder it. But his overarching kind of takeaway... So, certainly what I took away from watching that documentary on this specific point was that it was unthinkable to Blair that we wouldn't back the Americans. That was central to what he was thinking. It was unthinkable that we wouldn't back them. And I hear that loud and clear. Grace is down in London. Grace, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I was looking up the speech in which Churchill first used the phrase special relationship, and it's the anniversary of him making that speech tomorrow. And I noticed...
Well, what about that? That's a great bit of research. You've got the job, Grace. When can you start?
Oh, I would do anything to have a job.
Well, you can work from home.
I'm desperate. But Churchill said that American troops who fight alongside them want to bring up their children with respect for the Lord or ethical conceptions. And I'm thinking, what are Trump's ethical conceptions? I completely have lost all faith in Starmer, so I'm not supportive of Starmer, but I don't think that one should just presume that he should do everything Trump says when Trump doesn't seem to have ethics. He said a little while ago that he was only bound by his own morality. I mean, what does that mean exactly? There needs to be a moral absolute. And Hegseth was saying this afternoon that Trump has moral clarity, but I've not seen evidence.
But you see, when you bring morality into it, I mean, that is tricky, isn't it? Because I know Tony, we were talking about Tony Blair, he wrestled with that. I mean, I genuinely think that he was informed by his faith on what he did. Whether that's right or wrong is for others to judge, but
I wasn't paying enough attention at the time because I was a child and so I wasn't really following.
No, but I mean, it's endlessly replayed, isn't it? This idea of, us going into Iraq and the legalities of it and why, a Labour MP of all, of all parties took us into what for many people was always a little bit kind of, at best, controversial.
I mean, in terms of faith, and I don't know to what extent Tony Blair had faith. I remember Alistair Campbell saying that he didn't, but I think that Trump presumes that because he's opposing an Islamic regime, the Christian God is on his side, whatever he does. That's kind of the indication that, comments like Hegseth this afternoon, and Trump, when he referred to this intervention as a righteous mission, seemed to imply, but that's not really what the God of Christianity actually said. He didn't say that people should just go around blowing up their enemies. I completely pleased that the Ayatollah is gone, but I think that Trump actually needs to think first and foremost about how he can most help the human beings in that situation, rather than just kind of showing off American military
But
might.
isn't and it's a terribly dark conversation, because people die in war, and leaders are forced, or they choose, depending on how you look at it, to make decisions where that will be a likelihood, not just an implication, but a likelihood. So does that take a tough leader, or does it take a psychopath? I don't mean in the serial killer sense. I mean in the sense that your empathy is somewhat diluted already in these issues, so you're able to make those tough decisions.
I think you're completely right. They would need to make tough decisions, but there's not really evidence that Trump is actually being guided particularly by morals or ethics. If he were guided by morals and ethics, he wouldn't have cut the aid programs that he did, which are now going to lead to there'll be millions of people dying because of his decision on that front. So I don't think he's driven by morals or ethics. I hope he cares about the people of Iran, but I don't really believe that he does. And when people get very concerned about Islam in this country, one of the differences about, and most Muslims in this country are genuinely brilliant people, so I'm not tarnishing them all, but one of the differences about how Muhammad behaved is he tried to enforce morality upon people, whereas that's not what Jesus taught. And so we don't actually want some kind of ideology that which Trump is trying to impose now, where you just crush the people that you don't like to win power. And it's not going to lead to peace in the long term.
Great on that point. Thank you very much indeed, Grace down in London. It's always one to wrestle with, isn't it? It's whether you've got what it takes to be able to press buttons, command people to get in jets and drop bombs, hide in mountains and fire bullets. But that does, I guess, is that the only way that you can do business on planet Earth? Because you've got a bunch of people looking at you saying, we want you dead. So I guess you can. But you have to be prepared that there's going to be what they call collateral damage, but that's often human beings and stuff. I mean, we know all of this. It's just interesting when you put yourself in that place. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is indeed Talk. Just gone 3:30. More of your comments on the way. We've got some great calls and messages as well to get through. And also this. Of course, we've, as you would understand, and as you would, I'm sure, expect no different, been focusing on all manner of aspects of what's happening with Iran at the moment. Their threats regarding oil tankers, of course, is huge. It's closed many areas. The Strait of Hormuz, I'm thinking in particular, this has predictably caused a sharp increase in oil and gas prices, leading to concerns about higher consumer costs. Is this just an economic inevitability? Danny Hewson is head of financial analysis at AJ Bell. Danny, good to have you with us. Nice to see you. I mean, as sure as night follows day, I guess, right? I mean, if that happens, the chain is broken, stopped, arrested, diminished. Naturally, what happens on the forecourt is going to take a hit.
Yeah, absolutely. If we see a sustained increase in oil and gas prices, then absolutely there is no way that the consumer will not be impacted. And as you say, the Strait of Hormuz, really important to global trade of oil and gas. About 20% of oil and gas flowing through the world goes through that particular shipping route. So if it is log jammed, then of course it impacts prices. Another thing that impacts prices as well is the very human trend of going and now filling up people's cars. So we've seen queues in places like Spain as well as here in the UK as people try and beat the increase in price that we are expecting at the forecourt, because you're right, as soon as night follows day, that is indeed what happens.
Now, look, I know you guys at AJ Bell are politically neutral, I understand that, but is it not surely now an inevitability that, you know, Ed Miliband has got to whip out the drills and get into the North Sea?
It's incredibly difficult because in terms of price, even if we were to drill more and have more oil and gas coming from the North Sea into the UK, that wouldn't change the price that we are paying for that energy, because it is all on an international stage. So we have to pay the going rate. Of course, it is produced and drilled by companies, and you can't expect the likes of BP or Shell to give it to the UK for a less price than they would be able to get from somewhere else, particularly, you know, the likes of Asia, which are now looking elsewhere for some of their products. So the question of supply, that is more interesting because we now have obviously this logjam in the Strait of Hormuz, which is stopping some of those shipments getting around the world. So if there was more coming from around the UK, that would potentially be offset. But it will take time, of course. And in terms of security of supply, the big question is, what is the best thing to do for the future? You could argue that by increasing the reliance on things like wind power, that does help. However, at the moment, you know, we do know that we're expecting about 10 years while we are still going to need gas supplies, and that then creates a conundrum.
It's really annoying, isn't it, when you look back at politicians who made speeches, I don't know, in 2000 saying, oh, we can't build loads of little nuclear power stations because it'll take 20 years to get them up and running. We'd be doing it by now. It would all be up and running. I don't know what happens there, but that's something we can't change. Just on another point, Danny, is it just the price of petrol? Is it just that could knock the UK economy? Where else have we got to watch for? What else is going to go up? Will KFC be jeopardised?
Yes, the likelihood is it will be jeopardised, because if you think about the impact of those increased prices, oil and gas, the shipping routes that are blocked, what happened when Russia invaded Ukraine, we saw global prices, food prices go up. We've already been talking about the fact that there are now concerns about fertiliser. The price of that has gone up. So it's not just the shipments of stuff that's on boats at the moment that is a concern. And of course, the air has also been impacted. A lot of planes are not able to use that part of the world. A lot of products that we get here on our supermarket shelves come from that part of the world. So you can expect shortages and price increases if this goes on for a long time. But we've already had words from Donald Trump saying that he is going to try and at least get the energy prices stabilised, offering, of course, to escort tankers through the Straits of Hormuz. Whether or not any of them would be up for taking him up on that, I doubt the insurance companies will be that pleased. But no, I mean, inflation generally could be impacted by this, and we're already expecting that the Bank of England which we thought would announce an interest rate cut in just a couple of weeks' time, that won't happen. So, yeah, it's got a much bigger impact than just the price you pay at the petrol pump.
Well, it's not going to be dull. It might not be pleasant either, though. Danny, thank you for your time. Really appreciate that. Danny Hewson is Head of Financial Analysis at AJ Bell. Where does this go? So, filling up your car, that's one thing, but the shortage in the supply chain, that's been key to so much, isn't it? I mean, I think I'm right in saying that the reason the second-hand car market went through the roof for a bit, I think it's still pretty buoyant, was initially partly down to the lack of a supply of a chip that was produced in China. The factory that produced it, I think, was wrecked in a huge inferno. And the knock-on effect was massive, and nothing was getting built in that respect. Second-hand car market went through the roof. So there's things like that. Ukraine war that Danny Hewson there just mentioned, absolutely true. Wheat-based products were hugely affected. I mean, you had people on street corners dealing in Weetabix. I mean, that's the kind of issues we're up against. But what does it mean going forward in that respect? We're always in a palaver, aren't we, as Minan would have said. We're always in a palaver. Got that COVID thing out the way, the Ukraine war kicking in. Now we've got this thing going on. It is a bit Orwellian. Where does it go next? By the way, we're going to be joined by John Bolton on Friday. John Bolton is a big name in the world of geopolitics, of course. He is Donald Trump's former national security advisor. So he knows his way around these kind of stores. He's still a very bright man on the pitch. American attorney, he's a diplomat, he's a Republican, and he's got a lot to say. But where does he now, bearing in mind, he was fired by Trump, so where does he stand with what Mr. Trump is doing? Will he support him? Does he not? Details and more coming up. Big interview. John Bolton with us on Friday on the programme. Tim is in Worthing. Tim, good afternoon to you. On the economy, what have you got for us?
Yeah, hello, Ian.
Hi.
I was listening to Liam Halligan last night on his little live Q&A that he did, and he happened to mention the fact that in his lifetime, the Chancellor of the Exchequer has only ever had a surplus in the national budget 3 times in that kind of 55 years, however old Liam is now. So really, at the root cause of all of our problems at the moment, apart from uncontrolled migration and all the other issues of poor planning for energy and infrastructure, we have continued to increase the national debt. So every year we are just getting further into debt, and yet no politician, no chancellor, it seems no one will kind of wake up to the fact and actually do anything about it and deal with it. We just carry on spending regardless.
I mean, the crazy thing is, even if you hate the bones of this government and Rachel Reeves and the whole thing, they must know this stuff, Tim. I mean, there are a lot of things.
Yeah,
they're not completely... But somebody must go into the office and go, Rachel, we've got a problem. And in fact, whatever we think of her, even she must know we've got a problem. So is this deliberate? Is it about choice? What do you think? What are the kind of movements that go on to get to these bizarre decisions?
Ian, sometimes I do wonder whether it is a deliberate thing or whether it really is that they are that crass. I had a very humble start in life. I left home at 16 to join the Navy. I served 8 years. Back then, in those days, we had lots of submarines. We still had ships with 6-inch guns when I joined the mob.
Wow.
Just about, much more so than what we've got. And we are left with a hollowed-out Navy now. Makes me cry to think of it. And it's simply because of a lack of money, and also because of a lack of forethought, of vision, of where politicians wanted to take the country, and they have all failed, all of them. I'm just aghast, really.
Well, that's the bit that when we sit there and, I don't in any way underestimate what it's like running a company. It must be an utter nightmare.
Absolutely.
And as a few people that have worked in the kind of inner sanctum of government and number 10 have told me over the years, it's like turning an oil tanker around to try and get even if you come up with an amazing idea, to get it through all the various systems, that can take years. And even when you've got it through the systems, to put it into action can take years. By the time, you know, you get something up and running, the 5-year-olds that you intended the policy to help are now 23. So, you know, I know you've got to start somewhere, but we live in an instantaneous world, but not when it comes to politics.
No, absolutely. But again, if the civil service has become that, what's the word I'm looking for? So slow in its response mechanisms, then again we need a politician with the kahunas, if I can say that word on live radio, to do something about that as a first step. And hopefully, you know, kind of my last bet of my time of life is on Reform and Nigel Farage. Whether they get it right or not, I don't know. But I can't bring myself. I've voted Tory all my life until recent years. I can't bring myself to vote Tory again, because they are part of the failings that have brought us to where we are today.
Could they? I mean, some people are suggesting that, you know, Kemi Badenoch's star is rising a bit now. And as we move towards 2029, I know we're sort of 3 years plus away from the next election, but in the fog of all sorts of goings on with Reform and the Restore and Advance thing on that side, the Green Party and the Labour thing, the voice of sanity may well come from a newfound Conservative Party. What do you think?
Well, yes, but I think that newfound vision of Kemi, maybe, she is going to have to reach out to the likes of Nigel, Reform, even Rupert Lowe. They've got to find a consensus of right-wing policies that will take us forward. And they have got to agree to, as Nigel did before when he let the Tories win, you know, between themselves, they've got to do the right thing for the country. And only my opinion, but right of centre politics is right for the country, because I believe in the right of the individual to live their life without state intervention. And that 100%. One thing that never gets mentioned enough, life begins with personal responsibility.
Correct. And you know what? And the funny thing is, even if you were to have that conversation with a mad old lefty, they ultimately agree with you, because it's the natural instinctive way of life, right? It's not, to be really embroiled in left-wing politics, you've kind of got to subscribe to it. You've got to kind of say, yeah, I like this idea and that idea, and there's a bullet point list of what you tick. Centre-right politics is just within the human condition. It doesn't require joining a club. It's just there. And I think if you speak to people, even on, you know, on a good day, and say, do you agree with this, this and this, this and this? If your mother needed a desperate operation to save her life, would you go private if you had the money? Everyone says yes.
Yeah. So I'd like to share with you a little saying we had in the Navy. One hand for yourself, one hand for the ship. And I'll bring that into normal life for people. The one hand for yourself is taking personal responsibility in the actions that you carry out, doing your duty. The one hand for the ship is the little bit of help for the collective and helping other people, whether it's in a small way or a big way. But perhaps if we perpetuated that principle into politics, maybe we'd be better off than we are now.
One hand for yourself, one for the ship. Like it. Tim, thank you very much. I'm sure that was a video I watched when I was a teenager. I'm not sure. Let's go to Jill in Cornwall. Jill, what are you thinking? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. Well, it's difficult. It's difficult to think without getting angry, actually. I'm finding it very difficult. I'm really angry with Keir Starmer. I really am. Whether we like America or not, whether we like Donald Trump or not, they have always been our allies. And the fact that we are doing... I don't feel that we are doing anything when it comes to sort of protecting this country from the worst thing ever, another war, another fight. And yet, I wish that we had the courage to stand up like the Greeks do, or the French do, or the Germans are doing. We're the only ones standing back, watching things happen, and Keir Starmer making excuses. I'm cross with him for him involving me in the way he thinks.
Yeah.
He doesn't think like me. You know, he can speak for himself, but don't pull me into the way he's thinking, because I don't think like him at all.
I like it. Jill, love the passion. Thank you very much indeed for that. And there is such... I've never really seen a disconnect like this between Prime Minister and people. And doubtless there's going to be people out there that think... is there... even in Labour circles, is there anyone that thinks Keir Starmer's brilliant? The guy's brilliant, this guy. You know, people used to say that about Tony Blair, said about John Smith, some might have said it about Gordon Brown. I just can't imagine Labour supporters go, I love Keir, he's so good. He's so on it. And by the way, when I was talking to Tim, our previous caller, and I mentioned that if somebody said, oh, your mum needs an operation and you can have it done privately, quickly, if you've got the money, would you do it? Everybody would say yes. Didn't Keir Starmer say no to that question on I've got it rattling around in my head, that when they did the debates before the last election, asked that question. I can't remember specifically how it was phrased, but it was, you know, if a member of your family needed private healthcare, would you pay for it? I'm pretty sure he said no. Have I imagined that? I don't think so. More from you in a couple of moments. Loads to come. Kevin O'Sullivan's here after the news at 4, and Kev will pop in to tell us more about what is going on. Keep it here, 10 to 4. It's Talk.
No doubt that the British government has acted in an incredibly weak, equivocal way. It's easy to start a war, very difficult to ensure that the aftermath doesn't descend into complete chaos.
What's your view of that outburst of Trump?
Well, Trump doesn't mince his words, but I think his criticism is justified. I mean, we should have realised where our national interests stood, and he should have expressed immediate support.
We have pursued a ludicrous energy policy, preceding this government, frankly, and all the knock-on effects to that for our economy are catastrophic.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile. and on your side. This is Talk.
It's just gone 10 to 4. A little bit of breaking news. The Iranian ambassador has been summoned by the UK government. Foreign Office Minister Chris Elmore has told the Commons. I know, you often wonder how that stuff pans out. So the ambassador gets summoned and the government say, oh, we don't like what you're doing. It's a bit rubbish. Try not to do it. Thanks for coming. Is that it? I don't know how else those meetings can go. Dave is down in London on Starmer and Co. What have you got for us, Dave? Afternoon.
Hi, Ian. Afternoon, mate. Nice to have Natasha on. Really good. You had her on earlier.
Yeah,
the Israeli.
Always good.
She's always good. Knows her stuff. I trust her over Starmer and his other mates any day, to be honest. But it's definitely political with Starmer. I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? The reason it takes him so long to come out with something is they're all sitting in a room going, well, how do we keep Trump on side and how do we keep the constituents on side at the same time? And eventually they come to the conclusion that it's kind of one or the other, and they go for the constituents. And that's where they're going. Which I think in the end, the Green Party are going to lap them up anyway, because the Green Party will sell their soul for anything just to get into power, so he can't go that way anymore. And I don't think he's thinking far enough ahead, because if Trump and Israel pull this off, and in 4 or 5 months' time we are looking at kind of the end of Iran as a power broker, well, Hezbollah and Hamas, Hamas are gone, but Hezbollah are desperately trying not to send missiles over. Iran is telling them, get off your backsides and get some missiles in the air. And Hezbollah are saying, we really don't want to do this. We've kind of had enough of it. So those poor fools are running around every time they pull out a rocket launcher. I wouldn't want to be a rocket launcher operative in the Lebanon. I don't know about you. But
Absolutely not.
And I think it's so different now. The neighbours like Saudi, Qatar, and all of those who 5 to 10 years ago would never have gone for this. They got a taste of the Western world a bit. They've got F1, they've got boxing, golf, cricket, football. All of a sudden, they're kind of getting
I think
you don't taste of the Western world.
Well, indeed, and I think that I can see some people say, well, there are certain shortcomings and all the rest of it. I get that no system is perfect, but not many people. If you think about the obvious example, people who leg it from Cuba into Florida, Dave, because they want to start a new life. I don't imagine anyone has ever left Florida to go to Cuba, have they?
No, it doesn't tend to go the other way.
Never goes the other. No, I don't think anyone. Did you ever meet anyone in your life who said, I'm emigrating to Iran? I want to be a window cleaner in the capital. Well, not right now. That'd be a job, wouldn't it? Goodness me.
I'd say Iran's a bit different because the underlying Iranian people are different to the underlying Afghans.
That's also
Syrians.
true.
They're just they are a pretty, not progressive is probably the wrong word, but they're a very intelligent kind of community under there, and they're desperate to get out from under these mullahs, whereas I think, sadly, when you're in Iraq and maybe Syria and Afghanistan, the population have been suppressed for so long. They never knew what it was like other than under suppression, whereas the Iranians do, because if you go back before 1979, it's the same with Lebanon. Those two countries were probably, if what happened to them hadn't happened to them, would probably be a better economic power than the UK or anybody by now, even without the oil. So, I think that Starmer's back in the wrong horse. He needs to get back on the other horse.
Well, he's trying to sort of desperately row himself back into play, isn't he? I don't think he's going to achieve that somehow. Dave, thank you very much indeed. Lovely final call from Dave. There are a couple of messages as well I want to get to. Brad says, I think Marc Francois would lead us well in a conflict. Level-headed, knowledgeable guy. This in from Trevor. I thought Prime Minister's questions was interesting today as he didn't mention breakfast clubs once. A real and contemporary issue. It's a very good point. This one from David in the Cotswolds, who says, in law, there are two sides, the prosecution and the defence. Lawyers interrupt the law and then argue that law for their case. Interpret the law and then argue it for their case. A judge then decides, but don't have that. We have a lawyer who interprets the law. We don't have that in his way, and that's it. He needs to go for the sake of the UK. He's talking about Starmer, of course. The multifarious interpretations of international law. And interesting how literally within hours, Keir Starmer, along with Hermer, Sands and others, just came to this extraordinary jaw-dropping conclusion that no, we can't help with that because that's against the international. You know, they just right out with it. It underpins everything. It's his driving philosophy, his idea. It gets him out of bed in the morning. All roads lead back to international law. Kevin O'Sullivan is here. I think you talked a lot about that yesterday.
What will happen is the Iranian lawyers and the UN lawyers will say, yes, we've established that Israel and America have broken international law. Then the American lawyers and the Israeli lawyers will say, we're fully